underscore 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 underscore. 8 hours post-announcement, Kato fell to his knees. I'm never going to find her, he thought miserably, cupping his face with his hands. The tribute from 2 had been wandering aimlessly for hours, and soon came to a desperate conclusion. He and the love of his life, the sun in his day, his shelter from a stormy night, were trapped in a codependent relationship. Okay, so he was trapped in a codependent relationship. Clove didn't depend on anyone for anything. He'd have been lying if he didn't admit it made him slightly sick with envy. Kato was quite aware he was losing his mind. The hopeless boy picked himself up from the ground. You can't keep trying to kill me and then apologize every time you realize how dumb of an idea that might be. Yeah. I know, Clove, he said to himself. If his tribute partner had been anyone but her, he'd have left them to rot. For her, though, he'd go to the ends of the earth and then a little further. As he'd made his way through the arena, the gaps in his memory had become cleaner, shinier, and in their midst, had begun flinging repressed memories to the surface. They were inconsequential matters, the time he'd ignored Dicey for several days after he'd stolen his trail mix from in the 1st grade, and the subsequent pathetic behavior between the two that eventually brought them back together, the first time his brother had introduced Raiden to him, explaining that even though he liked other boys, he was still quite strong. Kato's snotty retort had been, "What's your point?" Even a recent conversation with Mally in which he'd been asked if he had any siblings, and had accidentally referenced Magnilda in place of Oliver. He wouldn't have been surprised if both hated him. Where in the world was Clove Holloway? She'd headed northwest when she'd skulked away from him. He'd gone just about as north and west as he could. For a moment, his stomach clenched. What if Thresh had gotten her? Bread boy, girl from 12, 5, they didn't stand a chance against someone like Clove. Thresh, however, and he'd been careful not to speak as much aloud, had his stature in his aid. No, Clove is not dead yet. He then amended, and she won't be for decades to span. We're going home together, and I'll. As he considered this, a parachute was released violently from the sky. The parachute hit him in the left shoulder, almost chastising him. "Geez, Felix," he remarked, looking to the sky. He unwound the capsule to find 2 ripe, rather tempting blackberries. Kato sulked, complaining, "Well, if she was around before, she's not anymore." Was Felix actively mocking him? Wait. "Thank you," he murmured, more to himself than to anyone in particular. Kato turned, heading in the opposite direction, glad for once to understand his friend's cryptic code. Maybe if he had agreed to play along with Felix's 3-year plan from the very beginning, he'd have understood more of them. As he hiked through the forest, Kato wished he could better appreciate the arena. It was a pleasantly cool, lush, and inviting space. Summers in 2 were dry, harsh, and often brutal on their overall health. He'd never been in a place so green, open, and serene. Sure, it was a false sense of security, but he didn't mind that much. Anything else reminded him of Mars, even Felix, and though he'd never admit it, mostly for the latter, their games had been the most heart-pounding and nerve-wracking he'd ever watched. Another hour passed in which he forced himself to entertain happier thoughts. A vaguely familiar voice admonished, "Do not overexert yourself, if at all possible." Kato sat for a few minutes, twiddling his thumbs, and trying to get a grip. For a moment, he wondered if he'd have been able to kill her. It'd have been inevitable, after all. Which life did he value more, hers or his? His. Definitely his. Maybe that's why the rule change was for 12 and not for them. The audience wanted District 12 to win, to be a pair of star-crossed lovers, or something equally as empty. Good fucking luck with that, he thought acerbically. He wondered briefly if the Capitol would have supported them if he and Clove had played a lover's angle. Probably not. Clove was about as romantic as dirt. In the distance, the sun rose, warming the arena and reminding him to remain vigilant. Loverboy was on his way out, but there was still Thresh, 5, and Everdeen. A single moment of weakness was all it'd take to fall victim. As if to prove itself true, a small rock came hurtling down, hitting him square in the neck. He let out a surprised yelp, probably not the most dignified noise, and turned, seeking his challenger. Recognizing his challenger was hidden among the trees, one suspect came to mind, and Kato's grip on his spear tightened. "Who's performing dismally in long-range weaponry now, Mom?" A second voice chastised him in return, "Don't be so blatant in your disregard." "Can the cavalry shut the fuck up already?" he grumbled to himself. "I've heard that talking to yourself is okay. Answering back, however, is pretty risky," a voice taunted. Kato knew her derision should have inspired anger. Instead, he was everything but. Kato spun around towards the voice, only to find that he couldn't see who he already knew it belonged to. Another rock flew down, hitting him this time in the forehead. She giggled nastily, pleased with herself. It wasn't a knife, though, and that was a start. "Now that you've had your fun, can you come down?" he asked, feigning the smallest inkling of patience. He couldn't see her face, her reaction, to fathom how she was processing their reunion. Only seconds later, she laughed again, "And make it easier for you to kill me. Do you want me to knife myself for you, too, Blondie?" Pejorative nicknames were her thing, a mechanism to keep people at arm's length. Despite referencing quite a catalogue to do her work, he'd found that in their years together she'd always struggled for anything particularly original. "Clove, we've got things to do. Let's go," he ordered. Kato tried to bury the small part of him that was gravely disappointed by her disheartening reaction. Then again, what had he really expected to happen? Again, he reminded himself, Clove was as romantic as dirt. Seconds later, another thought came to mind. Clove could climb. She could climb. Why had he ever thought otherwise? They could have ended this game days ago, but he'd been stupid, dumb as balls. "The only way you're getting me down is with a spear through the heart," she mocked, giggling to herself hysterically. Clove had officially lost it, he figured, but they couldn't really afford that for the both of them right now. Kato slammed his fist against the tree, tired and frustrated. He looked up, finally making eye contact with Clove. It shook slightly and Clove wrapped her arms around the tree, shooting him a glare. "Damn it," he cursed, wincing at his bleeding knuckles. "I could end all your frustrations," Clove offered in sweet voice, taunting him. She glided a finger over the blade of her knife and gave him a dangerous smirk. Anger boiled within his chest. "Cut it out, Clove. I'm done with all of this and I'm ready to go home," he snarled up at her, looking more himself, or at least, the himself the audience knew. "What's stopping you, then?" she asked, not looking too keen on helping him in that regard. "Don't you want to go home with me?" he inquired softly, now feeling pitifully sad. "Of course I do, but it can never happen. Only one of us can go home, and I. She turned away from him, and he wondered to himself what she was looking to. For several seconds, she seemed so far away from it all. He didn't understand. "Aren't you happy about the new rule? I've been looking for you for hours. Do not tell me you've been here the whole time, Clove." Clove didn't say anything for a moment, then asked reluctantly, "What new rule?" Kato looked up, dumbfounded. He paused, carefully trying to read her expression. "Two tributes from the same district can be victors. You know, the only rule change that's been made since we got here." Her eyes widened and he waited for her to drop down from the tree and lovingly jump into his arms, but she only scoffed. "What, do I look stupid?" "You've got to be kidding me," he groaned to himself. "Why would I make that up?" "Because you're a sniveling coward. Romantic as dirt, you know." The blonde sighed, trying to hide his desperation. "I promise I'm not lying. You promised to leave us to the final two and then instead of duking it out like someone with honor, you tried to kill me in my sleep like the sniveling coward you are. You're a certified born liar, Kato." Kicking the tree, he huffed. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I broke your wrist when we were kids. I was stupid and I fucked up. I'm sorry I threatened to kill your family, then. I know you were only trying to be kind. I'm sorry I didn't defend you against the rat bastard the first time, the second time, or even the 59th time. I'm sorry I broke our promise to stick together no matter what, and I'm sorry I broke it so fast every time. I'm sorry I hurt you after Mars died, when you only were trying to help. I'm sorry for being constantly indebted to you. I'm sorry for making fun of you after our first kiss and being a clingivus during our not relationship. I'm sorry for being a piece of shit and breaking your heart after you confessed your feelings. You did not break my heart, Clove quipped, immediately aghast. Shut up. I'm not done yet. Cato snapped, kicking the tree again. I'll for the rest of my life be sorry about the first night on the train, and for everything bad that happened afterwards. I'm sorry for freaking out about the supplies and hurting you. I'm sorry for trying to kill you, too. I should have been braver. But, you know what, Clove? I'm not sorry we're here, not at all, because it's just another obstacle we'll overcome together. It's always been the two of us, and the thought of that changing scares the shit out of me. So I guess I'm sorry for being a coward too. Clove struggled to form a response when a parachute fell from the sky, again in Cato's grasp. He opened it, unsure whether to laugh or cry as he held up a translucent bag, tied with a teal bow, and remarked with a broken laugh. I have trail mix. Warily, she descended the tree, stowing away her knife, and snatched the bag. About time, she shot hotly, removing the ribbon and stuffing a handful into her mouth. That's Cato, 1, Clove, 500. You've got a lot of bags to go before we're even. I missed you, you know, he informed her, quickly on her tail. She turned to him, staring daggers. You're not forgiven yet. His face fell, and she snapped, pull yourself together. I just spent God knows how many hours looking for you, Clove. If I'd known better, you'd have spent double that, Clove spat, unsympathetically. Apparently, Clove knew exactly where they were, because within the hour, they were directly back at camp. Along the way, his thoughts cleared up a bit, and as he followed her, he thought of when he'd first acknowledged his feelings for her. Throughout their friendship, there had been several crucial moments, some more poignant than others, but maybe it was the fact that Clove always had his best interest in mind no matter the state of their relationship that comforted him most. Her personality, which was lukewarm on the best of days, didn't matter quite as much. It was all a ruse anyways. She might not get romance right, but she certainly understood the underlying, most basic principle, love. Cato had been 11 when he'd realized she was more than just a friend, a super impressive sarcastic wit. He'd been nervous, shaky even, and she'd been Clove, snappy, short-tempered, and brash, but then she'd clung to him after the briefest tenure of success, and held his hand, and he'd discovered that he'd apparently become quite attached to the small creature. At the time, it had been a fluke. He'd thought it'd go away, but then Clove had stormed up to him, demanding to know why he'd been such a fair-weather friend to Dicey, and had again held him. This tiny wreck of a girl, his tiny wreck, was perfection, enclosed in a small, bitter, exasperated, and amusing package. Right now, she was wrapped in a very tightly sealed package. They sat at camp, not speaking for several minutes, mostly taking inventory of what they had, which included Cato's sword, a spear left behind from Datum, their tents, and a small selection of items in the remaining backpacks, such as fruit leather, a pot, matches, and their water canisters. After finishing their account, Clove handed him the bag of trail mix. Eat up, Elroy. Cato wanted to say no, to be selfless for once, but he accepted the bag. Apparently, not only was he a coward, he was weak too. Great, just another attribute for his resume. Clove stared at him, making him uneasy, when she suddenly, or maybe not so suddenly, pushed him to the ground. He deserved that. That, he was aware, but it didn't ebb the pain much. Hey, he quipped defensively. Listen, and listen good, Cato, because I have a lot to say and you have an awfully big mouth. You know, I bet the audience probably thinks I'm a shrew, that I'm being cold for not forgiving you right from the start, but here's a little replay of where we're at. For the first few days of the games, everything was fine, dreadfully annoying, but overall fine. On the 4th or 5th day, who can fucking remember anymore, we were all stung and I sat on the lake shore for 3 days tending to your wounds, scared to death your stupid ass was never going to wake up again. And what happened when you did? You dragged us out hunting, intimidated our ally, and then nearly strangled me after one of the other tributes finally got smart enough to actually fight back. It's the Hunger Games, did you really expect them not to try? You had an entire fucking day to clear your head, to get your shit together, and I came back to camp thinking you were back to normal. Then, I wake up in the middle of the night to find the boy who I thought loved me, the boy who'd become my first friend, standing over me with a knife. I had to travel for hours just to get away from you, and when I finally found you, you're standing there like some sad little puppy who expected to be fed and coddled, except I really have no motive to feed or coddle you, Kato. Not a single reason why I should care about you sad little feelings. So even though I love you, you still love me, he interrupted, his heart pounding. Clove glared, even though I do, I still think you're a piece of shit and this guilt trip nonsense needs to cease immediately. Kato sat quietly, so what do I do? Well, there's one thing you can do. Anything, he agreed, quickly. She rolled her eyes. Don't sign the contract without reading it, Blondie. Just name your price, Clove, he shot back, annoyed. I want Everdeen. What? No. She's mine. I already claimed her. That's my price. That's not fair, he challenged. It's the least you can do after putting me through the ringer for the last few days. You put me through the ringer through our entire relationship. I want Everdeen. No. Yes. Not a chance. I really hate you, Kato Elroy. Well, I hate you more. It's her or me, Kato, take your pick, and right as Kato was about to make a witty retort back, Clove pulled his neck down, and leaned in for a kiss. He crushed his lips back, enjoying the taste of her. Kato smiled into the kiss, pulling back. You. Definitely you. Clove's face lit up and she jumped into his arms, her adoring eyes staring back into his. Don't worry, I'll give the audience an especially good show. Kato held her close, finally able to breathe, and laughed. Don't ever leave me again. Don't ever try to kill me again, she shot back, airily. We'll see, Kato joked. That night, the pair laid together under the synthetic stars. Both were exhausted and neither felt quite up to hunting yet. Certainly, that would have made them look weak in the Capitol's eyes, but lately, Kato had been thinking he really didn't care what the Capitol thought. He wanted to get out of the arena, go home to two, and spend the rest of his life in the company of Dicey, Magnilda, Nero, Clove, Oliver, and the rest of his friends. He didn't think he'd even mind living on the same block as Felix. The duo inhaled the trail mix, chattering excitedly about trivial matters, Callan and Magnilda and how Kato planned to scare Callan off, their victory tour and the souvenirs they'd collect, candy-coated chocolate and how Kato planned to eat as many pieces of candy as he could when they won. The pair fell asleep, their fingers intertwined. Back in District 2, Magnilda nearly suffocated Hallie, holding her so tightly in her excitement that the blonde girl began struggling for air. Hallie laughed at her cheerfully once she collected her breath. In the morning, the Kato and Clove headed out further past the lake and towards a stream she had passed while searching for the tribute who'd blown up their supplies. Kato managed to spear a few fish, plopping them in the pot, one of their few salvageable supplies. He smiled at Clove, feeling accomplished, as she set up a fire and cooked the fish. He began to feel slightly bitter that he'd been deprived of food by his parents for so long, because in the end, he'd been acclimated to a pretty regular diet and lost his iron stomach anyways. That is to say that in the hours since sleeping, he'd become pretty hungry, and apparently starving him at 7 years old hadn't helped as much as they'd theorized. Upon reviewing their bounty and how he'd rationed it, Clove looked at him. I can snatch you some forest fruit. Kato smirked slightly. Your lips taste better and we know I can't have both. We probably look rather pathetic right now. Probably, he grinned arrogantly, but at least we're pathetic together. Together sounds good, Clove said hesitantly. Together sounds great, Kato corrected, wiggling his eyebrows at her. Clove began laughing uncontrollably. Kato, she choked out, her face convulsing. He slapped her back and she swallowed the piece of fish. He arched his eyebrows and they both started laughing together. I thought I was supposed to, she laughed harder, trying to catch her breath, supposed to be the death of you. You go down, I go with you, he agreed. Then let's make it a point to get out alive, Clove said, seriously. The two headed back to camp and began to discuss a plan to find the other tributes, finish them off quickly, and skip town. About an hour or two into their conversation, trumpets blared, and Claudius Templar Smith announced the infamous feast. Cato and Clove smirked to each other, bubbling with excitement. This man had just made their job a whole lot easier. Now hold on. Some of you may already be declining my invitation. But this is no ordinary feast. Each of you needs something desperately. The pair looked to each other, not exactly sure what they needed. They knew what they wanted: extra clothes, a more diverse plate, more supplies, but there wasn't anything they desperately needed. Then, Cato turned to Clove. What they needed was the opportunity. Pure and simple, they needed to gather their last prey and hunt them down. If you get fire bitch, I get fresh, he told her. Fair enough. Each of you will find that something in a backpack, marked with your district number, at the cornucopia at dawn. Think hard about refusing to show up. For some of you, this will be your last chance. Claudius Templesmith finished, and then his feed cut out. The duo strategized late into the evening, with Cato using rocks, blades of grass, sticks, and other items to develop a plan. He wasn't bad, especially considering how Cato had always neglected strategy as an area of study, but all Clove could think was yeah, right. Nope. Not in a million years. You're in for a surprise. Ha ha, as if. About 3 or 4 hours following sunset, Cato took Clove into his arms, and they laid together, ready to fall into a deep sleep. Clove leaned against him for support, but didn't fall asleep, instead reformulating a plan. Once she was done perfecting her plans, she began pondering all the things she would have lost if the capital had only allowed one victor and it hadn't been her, which it most certainly would have been, of course, her sister continuing to grow in a woman as beautiful as she was dangerous, Dicey graduating from high school and becoming a peacekeeper, even watching Nero and his nitwit bride marry. The capital truly was a kind, benevolent ruler, and she thought back to Athena's comments prepping her for the interviews. You, without the capital's doting affection, would be entirely worthless. Clove had a renewed respect for her mentor and couldn't wait to tell her as much. She wondered if she'd live in close vicinity to her, or if she'd be stuck near someone charitable, like Raoul Valajo, or someone mentally unstable, like Dre Holland. As long as she lived next to Cato, she didn't really care. What she would have most regretted losing most was the chance to beat Cato in the games, because the other players had never really been contenders. It had always been her against Cato, and right now they were tied 4-4. Katniss was hers. Thresh was his. Loverboy, they decided, could bleed out for all they cared, and if Cato tried to claim his death, she'd slit his throat and claim his own to even the score, so the final challenge was District 5. It was a frosty, cool night, and she leaned closer to Cato, who unconsciously brought her form closer to his. You're cold, Lovey, he slurred in his sleep, and she brushed her fingers across his cheeks. Was it healthy to forgive someone who only 48 hours ago had tried to kill her? No, most likely not, but was that a fair judgment for her to make? She'd have sent a dagger through his spine without a second thought. Though she acknowledged how deeply they cared for one another, it'd always be Amy's first sentiment. It was the only way to survive, to overcome their struggles in a damning environment like 2 West. About a half hour before they were scheduled to awaken, Clove discreetly removed herself from the tent, drank her fill of water, secured her knives, and made sure she was ready. This was going to be good. In the distance, the ground shook, and Clove realized how ill-prepared they'd been in planning their miscalculation. As she got to the corner behind the cornucopia, she saw the girl from 5 dart off, her medium, green bag in tow. Damn it. Now, I'm going to have to hunt after her later, she cursed to herself. In the back of her mind, Nero admonished her with crossed arms, cheaters never prosper, Clove. Luckily, her original bounty came into sight. The smaller girl hesitated before trying to emulate Five's plan. Ready for this, bitch on fire. Clove threw her first knife and to her utter dismay, 12 managed to deflect with her bow. Is that even fucking possible? You've got to be kidding me. She scowled, ready to throw another when the girl nearly sent an arrow into her heart. Clove turned and the arrow embedded itself nicely into her left arm. Clenching her teeth and shutting her eyes, she pulled the arrow out and assessed the wound. The girl from 12 took the opportunity to snatch her bag off the clothed table. Not today, Clove thought, and threw a second knife, which grazed her rival's forehead. Finally, something was going her way. Blood gushed down 12's face as she aimed another arrow, but Clove slammed her to the ground, pinning her down with her knees. She'd had a lot of teachers, both official and unofficial in her life. As the boy's visage passed through her mind, she grinned vindictively. She'd certainly had a lot of practice in this area. "Where is your boyfriend, District 12, she taunted, still hanging on. "He's out there now." Hunting Cato 12 snarled defensively, then yelled out, "Peter." The entire thought was laughable. Clove jammed her elbow in the girl's windpipe, cutting her off, and turned from side to side. Neither boy was in sight, and Clove pondered nervously. In a fair match, Bread Boy was toast, but if there was even the possibility that her partner was still asleep. Turning back to Pinned Girl, Clove grinned, "Liar. He's nearly dead. Cato knows where he cut him. You've probably got him strapped up in some tree while you try to keep his heart going. What's in the pretty little backpack?" "That medicine for Loverboy. Too bad he'll never get it." Her victim visibly flinched as Clove withdrew a small, especially delightful knife. "I promised Cato if he let me have you, I'd give the audience a good show." Struggling, her rival tried to break her hold, but Clove had enough experience keeping down boys twice her rival's size, and she was small to begin with, even smaller than Clove. Thinking of the best way to unsettle her, Clove smirked. It had been days since her last kill, and she'd yet to show the Capitol what she could truly do, so she'd eliminate the girl on fire as special tribute to their generosity, and show them they'd made a good choice in allowing both her and Cato to win. "Forget it, District 12. We're going to kill you. Just like we did your pathetic little ally." "What was her name?" "The one who hopped around in the trees." "Rue." "Well, first Rue, then you, and then I think we'll just let nature take care of Loverboy. How does that sound?" The grimace in 12's face sent a thrill of adrenaline up her spine. "Look who finally became useful. Better late than never, Marvel." Clove sneered, leaning in. "Now, where to start?" Wiping the blood from the other girl's wound, she surveyed her, deciding where to begin. After a desperate attempt to bite her hand, Clove forced her head onto the ground by her hair. With a purr, Clove began, I think we'll start with your mouth." She began to tease her victim with the blade of her knife. To her credit, the girl from 12 didn't take the coward's way out. She firmly kept her eyes open. "Yes, I don't think you'll have much use for your lips anymore. Want to blow Loverboy one last kiss?" Seconds later, the insect from 12 spat her in her face, and fury engulfed Clove. "So, is that how you want to go down?" "Fine with me," she seethed. "All right then. Let's get started." Right as she began to make her first incision, she was dragged away. All right, Cato." He sure was a sour sport, but Clove wasn't about to let him take 12 from her. Clove opened her eyes, ready to give the blonde a piece of her mind, when, "Not Cato." She let out a panicked scream. "Not Cato." Clove knew in this compromising position she didn't have a chance against the boy from 11, especially seeing as he'd somehow managed to gain weight in their 2-week stay in the arena thus far. Thresh lifted her up, leaving her feet dangling in open air. He then flipped her over and threw her to the ground. Clove let out a groan. "What'd you do to that little girl?" "You kill her," he screamed, towering over her. Fuck. 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 Fuck." She scurried back on all fours, trying to get away as quickly as possible, but found it near impossible to coordinate her movements with her wishes. No, it wasn't me," Clove replied, shaken. "You said her name. I heard you. You kill her." Thresh repeated. "I just said I didn't, you fucking moron." She thought, before realizing this wasn't a good time to making any snipes, whether aloud or in her thoughts. "You cut her up like you were going to cut up this girl here." No, upon catching sight of a stone in the palm of his hand, the size of a paperback novel, she paled. Clove could just hear Dicey muttering, a tribute from 2 done in by a rock of all things. "Isn't that cheap?" Cato, she shrieked out. His faint reply of Clove was the last nail in her coffin. Without a second to lose, Thresh brought the stone violently against her temple. Clove was paralyzed, but conscious enough to know her injury was irreversible, unrecoverable. Kato called out her name again, this time closer. I'm coming. Hold on, Clove. Everything seemed fuzzy. She waited for 12's screams, but they never came. Instead, she and the boy from 11 had a discussion on his whimsical, pathetic partner while Clove's chest rose and fell unsteadily. The two parties split and she could hear by the crack in his pitch that Kato saw her. Kato fell to the floor. Clove, open your eyes. She began to shake, unsure if it was from the overwhelming pain or the sob contained in her chest. We were so close, she whimpered. Surprised she could even get out that much, Kato lifted her into his lap, and kissed her forehead. His tears spilled onto her cheeks as her eyes fluttered open. Stay with me, please, Clove. He stopped, his sobs breaking up his words. Felix, somebody, help. Felix, he let out a high, trembling screech. Help. Please, Kato begged. But, nothing happened. No parachutes fell. There were no miracles left. They'd used one too many in their years together. Start it over. Start it all over. Kato called to the sky, tears rolling down his cheeks. Reset the game. I'll play it right this time. I'll be a better tribute. Please. Take me instead. I'll see her, Kato, she told him, her eyes closing once more as the pain shifted. Mama was always so pretty, and I'm just. At this point, both were shaking, overtaken by a cool breeze. Kato held her tightly, giving her as much of his warmth as he could. Don't say that. He snapped, shaking her. Kato planted another ginger kiss on her forehead. You're beautiful. His face contorted painfully as he continued to sob. He wished he could be strong for her. You can't go, Clovey. I'm not ready for you to go. Kato told her as he lovingly leaned in closer to her, pressing his forehead to hers. He closed his eyes. Stay with me, she requested weakly. Kato only held her tightly, and desperately croaked, I'm right here. His eyes glazed with fresh tears that wet his cheeks. With a fragile laugh, she managed, you're an ugly crier, beautiful. A messy half-sob, half-laugh bubbled in his chest as he cradled her head. He gently caressed her hair, and begged frantically, stay strong, baby. I need you. Nell needs you. Dicey, and Nero, and even the rat bastard need you, please don't go. Clove closed her eyes, and murmured gently, don't forget me. In the distance, a familiar cannon shot into the air, leaving one dead, but it might as well have rung twice. Underscore 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 underscore. A low-toned voice boomed theatrically, welcome back. We are currently in the company of Magnilda Holloway, sister of District 2 Tribute Clove Holloway. The games are down to the final 6, and even more impressive, a new rule change has been invoked. Under this offer, 2 tributes from the same district can win together. It's a wonderful opportunity for Clove, and her partner Kato Elroy, both 16. The brunette sat on a high stool, one knee over the other. A strenuous smile was plastered on her face and a new lavender bow was clipped into her hair. One of the research assistants with long, green eyelashes leafed through a packet, presumably on District 2 as the producer stalled. So, what's the first thing you'll do if your sister wins? Magnilda placed her palms in her lap, straightening her posture. It's not if, sir, she smiled at him sweetly, it's when. Clove is the one to beat, and unfortunately for her competitors, I just don't think they can pull it off. The camera panned a different angle. You seem to have a lot of confidence in your sister. Are the two of you close? We grew up doing everything together. She's my best friend. After all, we're only 3 years apart. Clove is determined and impossible to beat down, and she's always gone out of her way to make sure I have the best opportunities. The producer arched his golden brows, picking up quickly, what sort of opportunities? For a moment, She froze, picking her words carefully. Her cheeks flushed as she gushed, bragging, "If it weren't for her, I'd have never come so far. I'm the top of my class." Was she the top of her class? One of the research assistants squeaked, before covering his mouth. The director and producer wore exasperated expressions, but waited for her answer with curious eyes. Magnilda only smirked at the young man. "I think Clove's performance speaks for itself." Underscore 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 underscore. A sprained arm and slap across the cheek, these were the fruits of her labor. Wherever he was now, Dicey was likely nursing some pretty nasty gashes across his right cheek, courtesy of the young girl's long nails and short temper. As soon as the redhead had spoken his piece, which had been to the effect of, "Not everything is about you, Nellie," he'd run off to who knows where and left her with a stunned Callan and Hallie. She'd foolishly informed the audience that Clove was the one to beat. Her conscience wouldn't let her forget it, taunting that she might as well have brought the stone across Clove's temple herself. She'd baited the audience and tempted fate, and this was her punishment. When she'd given voice to her concerns, endlessly embalming herself in self-blame, Dicey had snapped from his stupor, and launched himself at her. Throughout Clove's death, he'd been entirely silent. Had Magnilda been paying attention, she'd have seen the glassiness in his eyes, and his struggle to breath. The way in which she had continued to fixate on her own role in Clove's untimely end had become the last, flimsy straw that broke the camel's back. The redhead could have said, "It's not your fault." He should have said, "It's not your fault." Instead, he'd detonated. Conflict resolution wasn't a topic of great importance at the Annex, a space constrained in rules, but otherwise a lawless land. The closest they'd ever been taught was that when they wanted something, tangible or not, they should have the courage to take it. That's all there was to it. Violence was an easy medium in which to trade, and the one in which they most frequently indulged. Only the smallest, most uncomfortable dab of sympathy could be found in Callan and Hallie's eyes. Magnilda had exercised all her goodwill, having played the manic, melodramatic half-pint role just a little too well. Now, she was tired, and just wanted a hug, a steady hold. At this point she didn't care from whom. In these 3 weeks, she'd irreparably damaged all of her friendships, from her rebuff of Ariane, to overstaying her welcome with the Wilder family. "Let me get something for your arm," Callan offered, finally brave enough to speak. Magnilda studied him for a minute. A part of her wondered if she had just wanted Callan as her boyfriend simply to emulate the relationship that Cato and Clove shared. All at once, several reasons came to mind about why that wouldn't have worked: their age difference, the disparity in their temperaments, the way in which he thought he was smarter than her, hell, even the way in which she'd immediately dismissed him as a source of comfort when things had gotten difficult for her. Sure, Cato had tried to kill Clove, but Magnilda had never doubted that he respected her, that he cared for more than anyone else. The two of them might have gone to bed angry some days, but in the morning, they were always on equal footing, and nothing short of a miracle, or a terrible disaster could tear them apart. That's when the young girl realized that Clove wasn't coming home. Not as Magnilda knew her, no. There would be no more late-night snuggle and shit-talk sessions, no more knife-throwing one-on-ones, no more pointless arguments between the two riddled in nonsensical insults. She was alone. With a croaky gasp of air, Magnilda darted away from Hallie towards the front door and sprinted the whole distance home. She collapsed onto the gravel path near her driveway, the rocks leaving imprints on her knees, and let out a dry sob. It couldn't have been only 5 years ago when Mars Elroy died. She barely remembered him, but she was starting to think maybe she and Cato shared far more in common than they thought. She wished she had another Halston Rooney to desecrate. She wished she had a dozen Halston Rooneys and an unlimited weapon supply. It took a couple of shaky attempts to unlock the front door, where she eventually collapsed on the couch. Her last thought as she drifted off to sleep was who deserved more blame, her for pinning a bedazzled target to Clove's back, or Cato for failing to protect her. Yet another thing they had in common, the inability to accept responsibility. underscore 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 drowning. He was drowning. Every strike of lightning sent a jolt through his spine and he flinched in its wake. The rain spilled down the sides of his tent and collected directly overhead. They were trying to drown him. He was going to die a miserable, dishonorable death. A dirty, cheap, unsatisfying death. He'd be an unmarked grave, a shame to his district, and to Clove. And yet, they continued to wait. To let them lie like sleeping dogs. He wanted rest, but it wasn't his decision to make. It never had been. If he died, Clove would haunt him. Cato had to win. The worst of it was far from over. He suffered from pangs of hunger and teeth chattering from the cold. If only his cohort mates could see him now. Oh, but they could. Or couldn't they? Were his sloppy tears a good soundbite? No, not if they wanted to keep playing the games the way they'd been playing them so far. What was more likely was that the cameras were more invested in the bitch on fire, her and lover boy fucking tenderly for the whole world to see. He was a muddy mess, evidence of his crimes, but he bet those sick fucks had enjoyed every second. Tired, that's all Cato could think, feel, breathe. He was utterly winded and overwhelmed. No rest for the wicked. Drowning. He was drowning. And he had no reason to swim. Underscore 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 underscore. Securing the dark-haired teen into a heavy blanket, the young man withdrew, hesitating. He watched the teenager with concern. "Don't touch me," the small, tired voice complained, stirring slightly before bolting up and opening his eyes. "I'm sorry, that's not. You're safe." Softly, the man added once again, "You're safe." There was a delay and Felix's eyes widened, trying to take in the whole image before him. "Finnick the one and only," the bronze-haired man replied, sardonically. "I definitely cannot afford you." Finnick cracked a faint smile at that. "Money's not my currency anyway." Felix began, reluctantly. "There's nowhere in Panem you'll get better care. This is the time for you to get help." Felix squinted his eyes, trying to see the green-eyed man through the blanket of darkness. "I'll keep that in mind for when I'm actually sick." His heart was beating erratically and Felix thanked for small miracles that his idol couldn't see him very clearly in the darkness. Despite the context, he couldn't bother to be embarrassed. "You been doing these things for long, Mr. Gray?" There was softness in his voice that unnerved Felix. "Felix. I'm just Felix. The president, he." "All right, just Felix. Got it." A wan smile appeared on Finnick's face. "At first, I thought your compulsive hydration habits were an arena coping mechanism, but I began to wonder if vomiting makes you feel better when things are unraveling." There was a beat, before Felix said hesitantly, "Why would it?" "Because it seems to be a consistent practice of yours to consume your body weight in water, which is pretty worrisome, too. I found you a total disoriented mess on the stairs." Felix put on a cordial smile. "Thank you for the help. I'll be fine. You always been this cynical of others. I just want to help." "I don't know," Felix said, bitterly. "Let's ask my friends. You know, the one who's dead, the one who might as well be dead, the one who might kill me for this, or the one who will definitely kill me for this." A simple yes or no would have sufficed. Felix wiped at his forehead, asking him, "Everything seems hazy." "Your sympathetic system went into overdrive," Finnick said, filling in the blanks. "You had a terrible panic attack made worse by episodic vomiting sprees. It was so bad that I'm surprised you didn't burst into flames." "What I wouldn't have given for the chance," the 17-year-old replied, morosely. "Sorry about your friend." "I misjudged you," Finnick remarked, the way her death affected him. "I never would have expected that out of a pair from two of all places." Felix used his hands to cover his face, struggling to regulate himself. Finnick watched him for a second. You want another blanket? You're shivering. The teen shook his head, averting his eyes, and then rubbed his cheeks. Finnick ignored his response, and covered him with a second blanket. Why did I volunteer for this? Felix asked, a rasp in his question. His voice descended into a broken quaver. I'm not smart enough to be a mentor. I actually thought that together they'd be indestructible and wasted everything I had left on a bag of fucking trail mix. If I had been smart, I could saved her, but I didn't. Handing him a small glass of water, Finnick gave him a sympathetic expression. It's a learning curve. Nero is going to hate me, Felix said, his chest tight. Oh, fuck. Nero is going to hate me. He's never going to forgive me for fucking this all up. They could have won together, and I ruined everything. Finnick leaned back. I'm going to be straight with you, Squirt, because I think you need to understand this. I don't think the game makers were ever planning to let Freckles win. They want it come down between your boy and the girl on fire. I swear if that bitch wins, I'll. The mentor from Foreside, think carefully about your next words. Felix burrowed himself in the blankets. Don't you get it? He snapped, desperately. I told Clove I'd protect her and instead I left her to die. She's gone, dead, and I'm never going to hear her chirpy little comebacks again. She was pretty much my sister, which I should have recognized as a sign, because I couldn't save my real sister, and I let her die. I could have. What? Finnick asked him, a hard edge in his voice. Been bedded by more sponsors. Look at yourself. I recognize that you don't have a choice in some matters, but you do in others. You don't sleep. You never left the game center the first few days unless you were securing a sponsor. By the looks of it, you hardly eat, and on top of it all, you compulsively drink water to help induce vomiting. No matter what you want to convince yourself of, there's nothing you could have done. You barely take care of yourself. How the hell were you expecting to take care of someone else? Most of what Finnick had said flew over his head as Felix started to sob, burying himself in the blankets, and trying to muffle the sound with the fabric. He couldn't take it anymore, any of it, being the capital's rag doll, being forced to choose which of his friends should win or die, losing his entire family pair by pair over the years. I'm not trying to break your spirit, but the unfortunate truth is that you've got a long road to travel. So, what are you going to do about it? A few years ago, Felix half listened to a lecture that asserted diamonds were the hardest substance known to man, yet they were known to be equally brittle. At the moment, that was a perfect synopsis of his current state of mind. Rough, yet irrevocably vulnerable. In 2 days, it'd be a year's time since his victory. A year's worth of appeasement and muddy water. With a grit determination, he wiped at his cheeks. I'm going to fight. Underscore 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 underscore. The massive tribute had been a challenge to overcome, one he would have normally accepted with a devilish grin. No, but this was different. He was different. The man from 11 had spat various epithets and degenerative words with hollow accusations. You're a monster. Yeah. Kato asked with a grin, and what's your excuse? The flash of surprise in Fresh's eyes had been worth it. To strip him of his dignity, and shine a spotlight on his blaring humanity, but he didn't deign 11 the opportunity to defend himself. He'd never had a chance. He and Clove had never stood a chance. Happily ever after had never been a possibility, and in the end, he felt stupid for taking 10 years to come to what should have been an obvious conclusion from the start. Fresh received a spear to the throat. Clove hadn't been able to speak her piece, to defend herself, so why give him the opportunity? It was an homage to her honor, and he hoped she'd enjoyed the show wherever she was. And then the rain stopped. They were sleeping dogs no longer. Underscore 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 underscore. They were ants spread across the city map. In the central west quadrant, Dicey Wilder illegally trained in the room in which he and Clove had had their first fist fight. Farthest north, Lieutenant Baltazar Holloway sat in station base, watching the games on one of the many screens spanned before him. In the western quadrant, Nero Kaiser laid in the protective arms of his fiancée as she ran her fingers through his hair tenderly. In southwestern quadrant, Orion Elroy stood in quarry headquarters, watching helplessly as his son stared into the sun, bewitched. With her arms crossed, his ex-wife, covered in a layer of soot, observed silently. In the comfort of their apartment home, Sandra and Oliver watched, sitting on edge as Cato traveled toward the lake. "Mama, Mama. Someone needs to help him," he bawled, looking away. "Don't worry, honey," Sandra soothed. "Cato's almost home." "He's almost home, sweetie." In the grand scheme of things, they were all so magnificently insignificant, just ants spread across a city map. Underscore 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 underscore. Ever since he had killed Thresh, Cato had felt increasingly restless and unnerved. He was sure there had been a great significance in the other tribute's death, but he couldn't pinpoint what it was. For a half-decade he'd loathed District 4 for what they'd done, something awful to someone he'd once cared for. The details were growing vague in his recollection. He'd wanted them especially to pay for their dishonorable acts, but District 11. District 11 was so irrelevant it wasn't even worth wasting time thinking about. Thresh was dead, so why did he still feel so disappointed? After resting through the night he woke late the next afternoon. He stripped of his attire, save for a pair of standard boxers, and immersed himself in the frigid water. Was it possible he'd suffered something akin to a brain injury in all the chaos? The blonde ran his fingers gently around the edge of his head and around the back. Despite a mild ringing in his head and a stiffness in his neck, Cato felt fine. The blonde racked his head, trying to compile a list of items he could recall at will. He had a lifetime kill count of 27. 5 of those deaths had occurred here, a drearily low number, and the other 22 had been in District 2. The youngest of his kills had been a starving, frail girl sold to the training range by her parents. He remembered thinking at the time that the worst part was that they'd probably barely turned a profit. Kids didn't sell well at the West Range. Few people, especially his cohort mates, wanted to kill a child. The oldest had been a man found to no longer be contributing to society. 27 was a shameful number, but by the way he felt now, Cato recognized that shame was nothing new to him. Cato had ranked #3 at the Annex. Even at the top, he still crashed towards the bottom. Kyler Gunn, the student ranking above him, had negotiated an arrangement with him. Gunn was to train for the 75th Games, but when Felix had been selected a year early, his candidacy had also been slotted a year early. Kyler had approached him preemptively with an arrangement, asking if he'd like to trade. Recognizing that if he didn't, he'd have been in candidacy with Clove, Cato had agreed. At age 11, he'd gotten his first kiss. It had been a cute, curly strawberry blonde and he really had no idea who she was. When she'd asked if that made him her boyfriend, and he in return had asked if that was what she wanted, she'd bounced up and gave him a resolute yes. Cato had let out an arrogant laugh. Awaiting bounty isn't nearly as fun, he'd taunted her. Something told Cato there was more to the story than the half-hearted, mean-spirited assault on her pride, but what it was, he couldn't recall. Today was day 16 of the Hunger Games. 16 days and 19 competitors eliminated. Very hesitantly, he submerged his entire body under the water and tried to wash the filth from his hair. On the banks of the shore rested his attire, the same green shirt, beige pants, his belt, and the skin-tight mesh of armor. He knew what it was for, to be used against 12's arrows, but he didn't know why he felt so fortunate to have it. Almost as if it had been fate that he'd been gifted with such a prize, and how valuable a prize it truly was. Cato had to win, that much he was aware, but he couldn't help but to feel as if there was more at stake than just his life if he lost. As he made the final count, a cannon shot into the air. Was it love or had the medicine failed him? No, more than likely the pair from 12 had found 5. Fine with me, he thought, Show me what you got, fire bitch. Kato pulled on the armor and then the rest of his clothes. He secured his sword in his jacket and then snatched the spear he'd used to kill Thresh, one of his very last, and headed on the long path downstream. Upon reaching it, he scowled, letting out a stream of expletives. They'd drained the stream, left it bone dry, and eliminated his last form of sustenance. They'd been watching him for days, quite aware of the boundaries he wouldn't cross, his hesitance to stray too far and drown at sea. Mocking him, they were mocking him. He thought back to his candidacy partner, whose name he couldn't recall. How she'd once picked up on this weakness. It's not that big a deal, Elroy. Try to relax. But it was. The game makers wanted 12 to win. They had been rooting for her from the very start. Cheated. He'd been cheated. The more he thought about it, however, the more he was convinced they were a bunch of sentimental fools. Kato smirked. Luck by its very nature was unreliable, relying all on chance. Skill, on the other hand, was a constant presence and one unlikely to shift. The odds were certainly stacked in his favor, and nothing they could do would change that. If they wanted a show, he'd be sure to give them one, and in his predecessor's words ruin her, and remind every tribute to come that no one likes a martyr. Hours passed as he foraged for berries, the sweetness that gnashed against his teeth felt bitter. Not too far away rested a bushel of nightlock. Glimmer had often stared it wantonly. Kato let out a nasty laugh. She had been entirely useless. He should have let her have them. What he would have done to watch the glance of betrayal as the light in her eyes went out, as her snake eyes shone no longer. He retreated to the now dry camp and fell into a restless sleep where he was haunted by a girl with hazel eyes. Kato promised her he wouldn't forget. But, as he rested under the flimsy shelter, he knew he had broken his promise. They had made him forget. When he awoke, he picked up the spear and headed to the west. The girl on fire had a strong grasp of the geography, having stayed in the trees when they'd caught her, having retreated in the same direction after burning their supplies, even calling out to her whimsical ally when she'd fallen. Here in the brush, she'd wait. As he stalked through the meadow, he grinned. The youngest tribute's blood still stained the dirt in which she'd passed. Just as the rain had failed to wash away his sins, they'd failed to wash away the capital's either. He was on the right path. Several more hours passed as he made his way, recalling various events that transpired here, being stung by trackerjackers, escaping the burning forest, the very first night. Resting at the base of the tree in which he'd once fell, Kato heard a howl in the distance. What the? Followed by trampling on the ground as the howls got faster. Kato quickly got to his feet, trailing away from the trunk of the tree. He tried to identify the creatures before his howls became unbearably loud. He bolted, running as fast as he could. As he sprinted, he tried to ignore the erratic thumping of his heart. They were going to kill him. They were going to make him an example. After running for what must have at least been a 20-minute spread, Kato stumbled over a root, dropping his spear to the ground. His face paled and cowardly tears nearly sprung to the corner of his eyes. Pull yourself together. A voice rung. Clumsily, he picked himself up and continued to run, finally making the clearing. Sweat poured down his forehead and for a moment he wondered if he'd collapse and die right then. It would be a most dishonorable and frankly embarrassing way to go. In the distance, back towards the lake, the tributes from 12 stood bewildered as he bolted towards them. The girl sent an arrow towards his chest, which rebounded instantly. He's got some kind of body armor. The blonde paid them no mind, heading towards the cornucopia. If they wanted to offer themselves up as a distraction, that was absolutely fucking fine with him. Behind him, he heard a huff, signifying that they'd finally decided to save their own skin. Kato climbed atop of the cornucopia, forcing his brain to discount the hiss of pain as his hands hoisted him up the side of the hot metal. Collapsing, he tried to regain his equilibrium and to breath, but everything just hurt. They'd never trained him for this, to run from a pack of oversized wolves. Hell, he'd never even see a wolf before, natural or mutated. In two, the mutations were carnivorous rabbits, ravenous bats, and camouflaged foxes. The girl from 12 made it over the side of the cornucopia, then turned back to help her partner, whose leg apparently had healed. Wonderful, Kato thought acerbically, before wheezing out, can they climb it? What? The girl from 12 yelled back. He said, can they climb it? Peter clarified. The pains were unbearable, and if he hadn't suffered brain damage before, he certainly was now. The wolf mutations stood on their hind legs, each different from the one beside it, and leaned their noses against the base, sniffing it. They each had collars, as if some sick fuck had been keeping them as pets. Kato could only imagine some austere, cruel man wrangling all the mutts together, when he saw that each collar had a number. A smaller mutt, with an ashy coat and brown eyes, stared at him. Datum, his mind supplied helpfully. Engraved in the mutt's collar was the number 3. The capital was much more twisted than he could have ever imagined. The girl from 12 seemed to come to the same conclusion as she let out a shriek. Katniss. It's her. Stupidly, the boy from her district asked, who? When she didn't reply, entirely manic in her movements, her partner shook her, what is it, Katniss? They continued the same discussion, allowing him minor reprieve. Right when Kato thought he could stand up, the mutts began their assault on the horn, shaking it unsteadily. His hands trembled. A cry came from the boy from 12, his former ally, as he was dragged over the edge by one of the wolves. A malicious grin appeared on Kato's face as his breathing slowed. Soon, it'd be just him and Fire Girl. If the capital wanted a show, all they had to do was ask. Distracted, she shot an arrow at the largest of the mutts. This was his chance. He launched himself at Loverboy, and forced him into a headlock. He'd won. The girl from 12 turned back to them as Peter struggled in his arms. There was no way for her to fire without sending Loverboy tumbling to his untimely demise. Kato laughed at her determined face, shoot me and he goes down with me. The two stood there at a stalemate. Would she commit the greatest dishonor and kill them both? At this point, he wouldn't blame her, but by the fire in her eyes, something told him she'd never even consider the option. She was simply too dumb to live. Kato's lip turned up into a satisfied smile. Time's running out, Fire Girl. What you gonna do? The boy from 12 lifted his fingers, crossing them in an X fashion. Kato furrowed his brows, but it was too late. The arrow pierced his hand, allowing Loverboy to slam into him. Almost ironically, he slipped on the gushing blood from 12's wound, and plummeted over the side of the cornucopia. Upon impact, all the air left his body, but the vaguely familiar voice rang again, pull yourself together. With a grim determination, Kato withdrew the sword from his jacket, and struggled against the pack of wolves. Several minutes passed as he defeated a few of the mutts, but not without his own set of scars. After killing one with red hair, he let out a piercing scream as another one clawed the side of his face. He shook, his determination wavering. Impossible. This was utterly impossible. Perhaps strategic for the first time in his life, he led them around the cornucopia, edging towards the horn in a desperate attempt to rejoin his competitors atop. His sword swung across the wolves, then rebounded against the cornucopia, a pang of metal against metal. His endurance eventually waned and he collapsed against the edge, catching his breath, before the pack descended upon him. Kato began to shake, blocking them with his arms. No, please. Fearful tears streaked down his face as they dragged him away. He let out another blood-curdling scream as the inevitability of his death sunk in. And he realized he didn't care if he was a coward, exiled, mocked. He didn't want to die, too much was at stake. He wasn't yet 17. He could have had a family of his own, become a doctor, legalist, a mason, or architect. He could have been an innovator, bringing new technology to Panem, to District 2. Why were they doing this to him? Why are you doing this to me? I've done everything. His eyes glimmered with tears, why wasn't it enough? Anger came to him again. He'd done everything right. He'd killed for them, trained for them, even driven himself to madness for them. The pain was excruciating, drawn out as they ate away at the limbs left unprotected by the armor. Don't. Please. Another mutt bit at the side of his head, and as he lost his hearing, Kato wondered if it were a blessing or a curse. As his consciousness faded briefly, he wondered who was watching him. Were his mother and father scared, sobbing miserably at the sight of his terrible end? He couldn't remember them, or what they looked like, their work, or even his relationship with them. Kato knew he had a brother, but that's all he could remember. Were there more, others? Did he have a sister too, an uncle, or a cousin? What about a girlfriend? Hell, what about a regular friend? Couldn't be. No, a real tribute. A born winner had no friends, only allies, and temporary ones at that. Everything was hazy, and he found it difficult to piece his thoughts together. Kato's screams grew louder, more desperate as they ripped off his other ear. The blood puddled around the side of his head, staining his hair a scarlet red. For some reason that seemed funny, hysterical even. Hours and hours passed and the pain only intensified, especially in the cool air. Numb. He was numb to his surroundings, and the only thing he understood anymore was pain. The sun rose overhead, signifying a new day. The mutts dragged him out of the cornucopia, but only slightly. One of the smallest, one with dark fur, licked his face, and he didn't understand. He opened his eyes enough to focus on the mutt with stunning hazel eyes. It was looking at him akin to pity, if that was even possible, but there was something comforting about that. As if he'd seen those eyes before. Kato looked at it desperately and called out faintly. Please. Right before the arrow pierced his skull, in his last dying breath, Kato Elro let out a faint whisper. Those eyes had once belonged to a girl named Clove. Underscore 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 underscore. Kato Elroy died 2 days short of his 17th birthday. He was survived by his mother and father, stepmother, and younger brother, Oliver. Though somewhat of an anomaly, he returned home in the same wooden box as many of the men and women before him did, and became the 128th District 2 tribute sacrificed in the name of honor. In his passing, Kato Elroy proved that even the brightest stars amongst us one day dim. Underscore 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 underscore. Epilogue, Part I. October, Year 75. Underscore 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 underscore. A young soldier staggered down the stairs of District 2's military base, clutching his gaping cheek with a dirty, damp cloth. The whole base would soon crumble, become ruins, just as the ancient Romans once had. If he tried hard enough, he could pretend it was just another afternoon in history class. Clenched firmly in his left hand was the machine gun, a pesky, dated weapon, but equally efficient and precise in its efforts. For a moment, he came to a stalemate. He could either surrender the gun and effectively surrender his life, or continue to drag the millstone and lose his footing. Distracted by the surrounding chaos, he crumpled to the ground. So this was how he'd die. Funny. The nasty rebels circled in on him, ready to end his miserable life, when a girl called out for them to stop, and then repeated the command, "Hold your fire." Katniss Everdeen. The soldier nearly laughed, a poisonous, toxic laugh caught in his chest. He'd been waiting for the day, the possibility, but he'd never imagined it'd one day come. They'd be proud, so proud. Dragging himself up by his knees, his mouth contorted into a sly grin as he positioned the barrel of his rifle to the crevice of her forehead. If he was going to die, then he was going to go out in style. She backed up, holding her bow in surrender. "Give me one reason I shouldn't shoot you," he challenged, a fire ignited in his darkened irises. "I can't." Confusion flooded the soldier's eyes. They'd been taught to think on their feet, to be sure and smart. Perhaps it was the honesty, the earnestness in her answer that unsettled him, but she wasn't done quite yet. "I can't. That's the problem, isn't it?" She lowered her bow, trying to rationalize the scene before her. "We blew up your mine. You burned my district to the ground. We've got every reason to kill each other. So do it. Make the capital happy." I'm done killing their slaves for them. Her bow fell to the ground and she slid it over to him with her boot, effectively leaving her life in his calloused, broken hands. It was a big leap of faith and he wondered how much trust she had in the decisions of a complete stranger, from someone as far away from her home as District 2 was. I'm not their slave was his only pitiful response. Katniss looked at him. I am. That's why I killed Cato and he killed Thresh. As she babbled on self-indulgently, the soldier balled his fists. Perhaps Cato had killed Thresh in the name of the capital, but no. No, that wasn't right. He'd killed Thresh for Clove, who would have never been in the games if it hadn't been for Dahlia's murder, who wouldn't have even mattered had there been no games in the first place, but, fuck. Damn this girl. Damn this war. He wanted to go home. The snow-capped mountains weren't worth it, weren't worth what he'd endured to get there. And he killed Clove, and she tried to kill me. It just goes around, and who wins? Not us. Not the districts. Always the capital. Everything hurt. He'd tried for so long to keep them from plaguing his thoughts, his every waking movement. Clove's redirects, her commands to calm down when his temper flared, and Cato's cheerful face laughing at his clumsy mistakes and keeping his feet stuck to the ground, telling him to never give up and cheering him on at every milestone. Heat rose to his cheeks and he took a steady breath. He was tired of being sad all the time, tired of the ache in his chest that never dulled. When I saw that mountain fall tonight, I thought, they've done it again. Got me to kill you, the people in the districts. But why did I do it? District 12 and District 2 have no fight except the one the capital gave us. Katniss Everdeen was going about it entirely the wrong way. It wouldn't have mattered if District 2 and District 12 had a fight. What she failed to understand was that it had never been about District 12. Hell, it had never been about any of the districts. It had been about doing what was right, protecting their protectors. She sunk to her knees before him and urgently pleaded, "And why are you fighting with the rebels on the rooftops? With Liam, who was your victor? With people who were your neighbors, maybe even your family?" A flash of black hair and white teeth, grit with defiance and determination came immediately to mind, but he buried the memory. He didn't want to think about him, about the traitor and the grievances he'd committed against Cato's and Clove's memories. How he'd failed them not once but twice. I don't know. The world was spinning out of control. Maybe it was the blood loss. Maybe it was the unbearable grief, but something flashed over him. Death had plagued the soldier all his life and he'd learned to treat it so casually, so tritely. He'd long ago stopped keeping count, lost his faith in something better, something different. Her grey eyes, steely and determined, only confused him and gave him hope. Why would she risk it? Risk her life, knowing that while she might win a single battle, she could never win the war. And maybe not for the first time in his life, he wanted something more. More than just honor and doing what he was told. She rose, gave him a quick glance, and turned in a circle, addressing the public of two, the sleazy miners who'd left him to die, "And you up there? I come from a mining town. Since when do miners condemn other miners to that kind of death, and then stand by to kill whoever manages to crawl from the rubble?" Oh, she was gullible. So terribly gullible. She and Cato had that in common, that and their casual grip, the way they both held their weapons firmly in their left hand, naturally, as if an extension of themselves. She was about as good a speaker as Cato, too. Only convincing in the barest of states. The miners actually thought they had a chance, that they could rebel against the capital and win. He'd told his mother, a miner herself, not to join them and condemn herself to a terrible fate. She grabbed his face, kissed his cheek, and told him each morning to be careful and be brave. He'd failed her in the former, but was desperately trying not to in the latter. It was a hard end to avoid when suffering through immeasurable pain, when you could feel the life slowly slipping from your lips. "These people are not your enemy," the braided girl shouted, pointing to the wounded soldiers gasping for air. Then she turned to the hiding rebels. "The rebels are not your enemy. We all have one enemy, and it's the capital. This is our chance to put an end to their power, but we need every district person to do it." She had a lot of guts, a lot of nerve, and as she extended her hand to him, inviting him into her alliance, the soldier blinked. He'd been in so many before, but with Katniss Everdeen. He'd never conceived such a fate, and all he could think was that Clove would have liked her. Had she had the chance, Clove would have really appreciated the girl's nerve, and by the looks of it, Katniss Everdeen needed a Clove. She needed someone swift, deliberate, and tactile. Someone smart enough to know better. None of it mattered, though, because just as he was about to accept her grasp and the chance at a new life, Katniss Everdeen was shot in front of his very eyes, and the world fell into chaos once more. Underscore 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 underscore. Epilogue, Part 2. Underscore 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 underscore. The 3rd of July, 1974. 18. Tangled uncomfortably in the sheets, Felix pulled the heavy blanket over himself, and let out a breath. Warm. He was so deliriously warm. This summer fever had done a number on him, but his patrons didn't care. I survived. He couldn't make his peace with the vulnerability of it all. Asleep, his companion didn't seem nearly as animate and bizarre as most of the capital citizens normally did. It didn't lessen his desire to smash her over the head with his trusty warhammer, but at least she wasn't as garish and painful to look as they normally were. Her natural locks, which were a soft blonde hue, were more attractive than the purple wig they were hidden under. The more he watched her, though, the more he was convinced that the Capitolites were magnificent canvases of art gone magnificently wrong, that is. With how many one-timers he'd serviced in the last year, the raven-haired man wondered briefly if he had any children or soon-to-be children out and about in the world. Zaina, from his prep team, had spoke of the trend of Capitolites to seek out Victor for this very reason during his tour. Felix cringed, desperately hoping against hope that he'd been lucky enough to avoid such a fate. After all, his life was in their hands. In the postmodern culture, the one that had preceded Panem, a boy became a man the day he turned 18. Further back, though, one became a man at the time of consummation, at religious ceremonies, at marriage, at the assumption of head of household. In District 2, however, it was commonly held that children crossed the threshold the day they turned 12. It was the age in which one gave up all right to aid, consent, and frailty. He'd given up all of that and more before age 12. Still, Felix Gray did not feel like a man, whatever that meant. A few years back, he had stolen an anthology from Cato when the blonde had gone an endless rant about his coursework. In the decrepit, old book was the tale of a man named Benjamin Button. He was a man who, as he grew wiser, grew younger. It was the unfortunate end to an unfortunate end. As he closed his eyes, the memory of his sister's warm, brown eyes smiled down upon him. You don't understand love, Felicity. I don't understand a lot of things, Jade. Underscore 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 underscore. The 4th of July, 1974. The smell of decomposition permeated the air, making the funeral nearly unbearable. In any other context, he'd have found it amusing. You could literally pick out the killers and mass murderers, the men, women, and children who'd stolen someone else's last breath. These individuals, despite their pressed suits and luxurious jewels, were entirely unabashed by the odor. 14 days was an uncomfortably long time to wait to bury a body. It was standard to wait a week before initiating burial processions, but they'd all pleaded with the lieutenant to wait, because to bury Clove on the 27th, on Cato's birthday, seemed unfathomably cruel. His body arrived 7 days after his death, the 25th of June, on the 1st of July. Irony was a fucking bitch. Region rules forbid burials and weddings on this day, as it was the official initiation of a new training year, a day in which the economy thrived and businesses were required to extend their hours. The next day had been the second, Magnilda's 13th birthday, and not even District 2 would demand a girl to bury her sister on her own birthday. The following day Felix had been summoned to the capital and he had begged Nero to make a plea on his behalf to the lieutenant. "Just one more day, sir. Please. Just one." Thus, today was the 4th of July and even in the torrential downpour the putrid smell lingered. He wiped at his nose desperately, but the stench remained. Clove Holloway was literally rotting before his very eyes. "Deprive me of honor and I'll deprive you of sanity. We'll see which of us can hold out longer, rat bastard." There was a standard of decorum for the many tributes that sought honor and returned in a body bag, and it was read only once for the both. The brunt of the crowd feigned morose faces, a polite, expected form of respect for the deceased. Only a dozen or so men, women, and children held any verity in their grief. Oliver, the blond Felix recognized as Cato's brother, leaned into his mother's coattails, his tears dabbing the silky material. The lieutenant stood resolutely, a distant figure from his remaining daughter. Nero was positioned carefully between his mother and his fiancée, a slight tremble in his chest. Felix wanted more than anything to tell the ash-haired boy that everything would be okay, that he'd get through this, but Felix himself wasn't getting through it. He was barely surviving on his own and he knew he couldn't lie anymore, couldn't spit out any more half-truths. After all, it was his fault they'd failed in the first place. Underscore 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 underscore. September, year 74. The anniversary of Jade and Roxanne's deaths was uneventful. Whenever he was feeling particularly masochistic, he'd sit in his niece's bright green room, the one he'd built but that she'd never gotten a chance to see. On this day in particular, he rested against the wall with Vega nestled comfortably against his chest. A short period of time passed as he thought of all the things he wished he could have said, how much he wished he had told Roxanne every single night that he loved her, because he had, even if only a little, and even if not as much as he should have. This was the year she would have turned 6. Vega soon grew tired of waiting and bit him, leaping out of his arms, and tearing throughout the room. Wild jackrabbits didn't exactly make good pets and this one had made it abundantly clear in the year he'd held it hostage. He hadn't exactly been the best caretaker either, often passing off the responsibility of feeding it to one of his neighbors, Lime Welsh's daughter. She was 15 maybe, with wavy brown hair. The rabbit should have considered itself lucky. When they'd been younger, he and his friends had experimented on the small creatures. One could only guess what that entailed. Eventually, Vega grew sick, and Hannah, Hillary, Heidi, something with an H, told him he needed to release it back into the wild. His initial response had been coarse denial. The rabid pest was all he had left, but she'd looked at him gently but affirmatively and told him that if he really cared for the small creature that he'd give it the opportunity to live. In late November, during one of the Welsh girls' holiday breaks from school, they traveled back into a patch of brush and released his last companion into the wild. Vega vanished in a matter of seconds. Underscore 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 underscore. May, year 75. He'd expected the in fair Verona shit from Cato and Clove, but 12 was really fucking clumsy. The victors of the 74th games became engaged at the close of their tour, which Felix could literally not have cared less about. Well, until it set off a cataclysmic end for the rest of them. President Snow's announcement came in the wake of early spring. It hadn't taken long for Dicey and Nero to make the one-hour commute to Victor's village and demand he avenge Cato and Clove. Like many of the victors in his neighborhood, they were absolutely thrilled with the announcement. Many of his neighbors returned to their training regiments, readying themselves for a second bid at glory. He worked hard to put on a brave face, waving off any hints of concern, when Brutus had drunkenly slapped a hand over his shoulder at his reluctance. "You take this from me, kid, and I'll break your goddamn arm." He took a swig of his drink and grinned, "And then I'll break anything else you need." Felix let out a sigh of relief. Brutus really was the coolest old man he'd ever met. One afternoon only weeks before the reaping, Lime Welsh stomped over, banging on his door, and changed his life. He'd expected some lecture, for her to blow him down for spending brief respites with her daughter, but he'd never been interested in the kid. She was even younger than Clove would have been. I heard from some pretty fucker in 4 that you're ready to fight. That's still true, kid. His first reaction had been to run. The capital had heard every blasphemous word and was ready to cremate his treacherous ass, but he'd only looked her in the eye, asking doubtfully, "And what if I did?" She smirked, "You're in for a treat." Underscore 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 underscore. The Quarter Quell and its Aftermath, June, September, 75. Felix Gray hadn't dared to volunteer in any capacity. Several days into the games, the television screen flashed black and the world went to hell in handbasket. Soldiers stormed through his home, barking commands, raiding his house, and taking him captive. "What do you want?" "I'll comply. Just let me go, motherfuckers." One of the soldiers smashed him in the face, and when he woke up, everything was peachy keen from his newest residence in the capital's torture chamber. For weeks, all he heard were her agonizing screeches. Johanna Mason, one of the most brilliant victors he'd ever witnessed, had been reduced to this. Sure, he had despised her in the aftermath, but even he couldn't deny the sheer intensity of the young woman. He tried keep his sanity by finding justice in Peter Mellock's blood-curdling screams, working to imprint them over the memory of Cato's pleas for mercy, but he failed in such an endeavor. 6 weeks passed until the rebel soldiers stormed through, rescuing several victors. He'd been saved by. The immensity of pain overwhelmed him, and that spoke volumes for not only how much had been done to him, but also how far he'd fallen from his former glory. He opened his eyes to find the steely grey eyes of his savior. Days later he heard one of them whisper, "Gail Hawthorne." A few days into his recovery, Finnick Adair visited him in the hospital and tried to recruit him for the next rebel mission, the mission to capture Tutu. "He's a good kid, hey Mitch." Hey Mitch Abernathy seemed to believe that as much as Felix did. "Not good, and not a kid," Felix spat petulantly, pointing to himself. Look what he'd been reduced to. Finnick told him to shut up. "Felix, come on," Finnick goaded him. "You told me that you were going to fight. This is your opportunity. We need your consultation to do this right." The man from 12 nodded in the affirmative, still not trusting. "What do you know about District 2's infrastructure?" "More than you could ever imagine." Underscore 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 underscore. October, 75. He and Katniss Everdeen spoke for the first time aboard the hovercraft to District 2. "Why would you help us?" she asked him, the doubt smoky in her eyes. Felix had long grown tired of the constant weariness. The rebels were the capital, just painted a different shade. Literally no distinction, no difference in the way they looked at others. Their us versus them mentality was growing tiresome. He opened his mouth to make a nasty retort when he realized that she was quavering slightly. She was scared of him. Felix grinned, satisfied. How long had it been since he'd met someone that still considered him a threat? He calmed down, the self-satisfied expression vanishing, and he only replied, "The war's not just about you. Jade. Roxanne. His parents. Clove. Cato. Nero's father." The braided girl watched him hesitantly, "I know," and then turned back to her window. That was the extent of his communication with her. Underscore 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 underscore. Lime was their flagship leader, and she often discussed the different strategies the rebels had employed to try to bring down the military base. The Mockingjay wasn't actually allowed to directly participate in combat. Felix wasn't so sure she was a good fighter anyway. So she divided her time between filming propaganda shorts for the districts, visiting the ill and wounded, and hunting in her free time. Despite being heavier than she had been in the games, she was still thin and flimsy. How Clove had lost to her of all people he'd never know. Well, he did. Clove had been arrogant. Clove had been herself, really. But it was hard not to be arrogant when you looked at Katniss. She was so innocuous. He'd been assigned to the combat unit, working with many of rebels from 2. The oppressed men of 2 North, many older than himself, and even less privileged than he'd been. The capital soldiers, which were the men and women of 2, had been hosted in the military base. He could have been one of them. Once upon a time, he'd wanted to be. He could have been like, Felix, you're okay. Fuck. You're with them, aren't you? He could hardly stand it. The flash of betrayal in Dice's eyes, the accusation, but most importantly the disappointment. So he did what he did best by shutting him up with a punch to the abdomen. Speed had always been Dice's crux, however. He thrust the gun up against his chest. One pull. Felix knocked the gun out of his hands, cursing, "Don't be a coward, Dicey." That was all the redhead had to hear before he tackled him to the ground, the two rolling around like children in a school fight. Felix threw a second punch. "You're going to lose. Don't underestimate your opponent," he spat back, his fist connecting with Felix's jaw. The raven-haired man grinned as he pinned down the younger man. It had been the first thing he'd ever said to the auburn-haired boy. "You're not cut out for this line of work. Dicey need him, never placed much emphasis on your opinions anyway." Felix hit his head against Dice's, causing him to fall back and clutch his forehead. He assumed the vantage position, when he heard a familiar call, "Don't let your guard down, Dice." Perhaps quite stupidly, Felix turned towards the speaker. He kicked Dicey in the side twice, forcing the soldier to hold on to his stomach for air. Nero's blue eyes looked on at him, and he panicked, pointing his gun at Dicey's chest. "One move and I'll blow him to smithereens." "Who's the coward now?" Dicey managed to wheeze. "You're on their side," Nero breathed, stunned. With a swift movement, Felix hit Dicey over the head with the edge of his gun, knocking him out cold. None of his thoughts streamed cohesively. "I thought you were dead," Nero rasped out, looking absolutely stricken at his betrayal. "You've been with them the whole time. You bastard, you." Technically, that wasn't true, but it didn't stop the heaviness returning to his chest. He needed an out. Felix closed his eyes and released the trigger. Nero went down in seconds, the gaping wound in his thigh bleeding quicker and quicker as the raven-haired man made his escape. "What will do when this war is over?" Nero demanded of him, but Felix refused to reply, continuing his ascent away from him. Underscore 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 underscore. Weeks passed before 13 sent in a second team composed of strategic workers, the brains. From the second he arrived, Gale Hawthorne observed his every movement, stalking after him, and never leaving to him to his own misgivings. "I don't come cheap, pretty boy." The dark-haired man blanched slightly, before resuming his stance of defiance. "I don't trust you, and I don't care what Haymitch or any of the rest of them say." Felix grinned, quite satisfied to finally hear the discontent aloud. Hushed whispers were fucking petty. "Fine with me, but don't expect to last long if you don't trust us. Your life is in our hands either way." One afternoon, they were assembled to take a second look at the military base's interior. The rebellion had come to call it the Nut, which irritated him more than it should have. Then again, most things had irritated him since returning to 2. His life had effectively stagnated. They'd been there for weeks and virtually no progress had been made. The brains as they'd been called were hardly worthy of their title, making several inane suggestions that wouldn't work for various reasons. Finally, Lime spoke on behalf of all 2 rebels, Felix included. "The next person who suggests we take the entrances better have a brilliant way to do it, because you're going to be the one leading that mission." He let out a breath of frustration, sharing her concerns, when Gale finally offered an alternative. Instead of taking out the military base, they'd disable it. His stomach tightened at that. So you're suggesting we start avalanches and block the entrances? Lime asked. That's it, Gale said. Trap the enemy inside, cut off from supplies. Make it impossible for them to send out their hovercraft. It was simple, but clever. Risky, but brilliant. He'd have appreciated the sentiment more if didn't mean that they'd have to die. Nero. Dicey. Lieutenant Holloway. They'd suffocate. Which wouldn't even be an honorable way to go, but he couldn't object now. He'd made his bed, now it was time to lie in it. We'll never be able to trust them again, Gale remarked. They should at least have a chance to surrender, Lime shot back. Well, that's a luxury we weren't given when they firebombed 12, but you're also much cozier with the capital here. Felix's eyes narrowed violently. It took every ounce of restraint he had and then some to cool himself off. Lime didn't look any better off. He'd made the wrong decision. 13 was no better than the capital and now he was paying the price. A few days passed and then it came time to test Gale's theory. Spectacular. It had been absolutely spectacular. He, the Mockingjay, her guard, Gale, and a select batch of 2 rebels watched as the rocks slid down the side of the mountain, effectively shutting it off from the world. Felix tried not to wince. His parents had gone a similar way. I'll be okay, Jade. I'll win, and we'll be okay. We'll all be okay. Those were the words he'd spoken to his sister the day he'd volunteered for the games. Hours and hours passed. Things became dreary and hopeless. The chances of any survivors became nil. I'm sorry, he thought, his chest heavy with remorse. The Mockingjay was taken away to make a speech and announce their victory. As if it wasn't visible from the lack of movement and heavy air. As Katniss began her speech, there was a breeze and then the ring of an arriving train. Rebel soldiers waited, tense and ready to fire at any movement. One of them shot out the train's headlight as the door opened. Felix squinted his eyes, unable to see well in the darkness. A young man stumbled out, clutching his gun in one hand and a cloth in the other. Dicey. He'd survived. Don't do anything stupid, Felix thought. Katniss approached him, calling off the attack and kneeling beside him when he pointed the barrel of his gun directly at her. Fuck. Why did Dicey always have to learn the same lesson twice? Underscore 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 underscore. As the auburn-haired woman changed his bandages, she murmured sadly. Baby, I told you to be safe. The position on his side wasn't the most comfortable, but the healing process for his burns had been taxing and he'd preferred not to exacerbate his situation. Cato would have been proud of him for that one. He let out a breath, never been much of a good listener. A stern expression replaced her sadness, but only for a moment. Isn't that the truth, she quipped. She combed her hand through his hair and rubbed his shoulder soothingly and he nestled closer to her. Dicey let out a hacking cough, but it's okay, because I finally did it. The permanent expression of discontent and concern didn't leave her face as she warily asked. Did what, honey? His eyes remained closed, but a faint grin lit up his face. Made enough money. Hallie's finally free. I did it, Ma. An immense sadness fell over his mother, who only stroked his face gently. Her baby wasn't a baby anymore. A surge of pride rushed through her. She'd raised him right, he'd grown up to be such a good man. Dicey, she began. Wasn't entirely selfless, though. He waved her off, embarrassed a bit by the admiration in her voice. His mother didn't know half the sins he had to make up for, and he still had long road ahead of him. I had to prove to myself that I'm not him and I did. I made a promise, a big one, and I kept it. The sentiment that he didn't dare articulate resonated like a bell. Hallie was free. And now so was he. underscore 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 underscore. December 75. Felix met President Cohen for the first time late in the year 75. He tried to hide his repulsion and confusion, but it was too thick. Clear as day, really. The decision had been immediate and he was effectively left out of any more missions, having outlived his usefulness in her eyes. He didn't mind. He knew he would have died if Katniss hadn't stipulated that all surviving victors remain safe. He pretended to be grateful. Once in a while, he'd catch glances of Finnick and his wife, the victor of the 70th, Annie Crester. Good for Finnick. Annie looked exactly like how he felt on the inside. He amended the thought, he probably didn't look good outside, either. Underscore 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 underscore. January 76. After successfully ensnaring District 2, the next logical target for the rebels had been the capital. It was a shitstorm, to be put nicely. First, Katniss was announced as dead. Then the announcement was rescinded. They'd sent in Peter, who was about as stable as Cato had been when Clove died. Finnick became a casualty of the mission, and though he had barely known the man, Felix still felt a sense of loss. He owed the man so much more than he'd ever given him, because he'd been the only member of the rebellion with even a sliver of faith in him. It didn't help knowing that Finnick had left behind a legacy, reminding him entirely too much of Nero and his father. Towards the very end, President Snow took several children hostage, using them as collateral and protection. He should have hired Felix as an advisor. He could have at least warned the president that 13 had never deigned having sympathy for the plight of children, just another manner in which they resembled the capital. The Mockingay's sister was only one of the many casualties, but the shift in Katniss' behavior was immediate. She imploded. President Cohen's resolution was to take a vote, which essentially boiled down to whether or not they should host a final Hunger Games with the wealthiest, most influential capital children. He'd been extremely grateful not to have participated in the vote. Weeks passed and he still didn't know what decision he would have made. Probably the wrong one. However, when it all boiled down, Katniss ended being smarter than he previously thought. President Cohen became the last casualty of war. Felix could not have been more impressed. Underscore 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 underscore. February 76. He ended up taking Gale Hawthorne home to 2. The strong, burly young man might have made a select candidate in another life, and shared the same ruggedness. For the first few weeks, he sulked, watching the world from the window and saying little. One night, Felix grew frustrated. Gale hadn't even lost anything important, just failed to win the girl. There were thousands of them in 2. When he'd finally called for Gale to move past this, he'd sighed, exasperated, "I wouldn't expect you to understand. District 2 isn't exactly known for its loyalty. You all live in a world of putting your individual selves first, forgetting what matters, honesty, integrity, family." He continued, "But in District 12, all we have is one another. We're tied together by our mutual loss. Here, your common endeavor is to massacre others to win a house. So, I understand why you can't empathize, but..." Great, Felix thought to himself, when the first tear fell. He was crying. Just what he wanted. He'd been a warrior once. Oh, how the mighty had fallen. What could you possibly know about my district that you've figured out from my damn window in 3 weeks, Hawthorne? Gale looked at him, still disconnected. "I didn't think people like you could cry." Felix looked him over, furious and perplexed. "You can dislike that we bucked a system designed to murder children, 12, but we're still human." Felix reined his temper in and continued to watch Gale, who'd returned to his window. Clearly war hadn't exposed this man to the full expanse of individuals one could meet in a lifetime, because such commentary was reductive. Certainly, District 2 had its share of cultural competencies to work through, but to believe they were incapable of pain. He'd never thought that of other districts. He'd just never cared. Felix couldn't figure which outlook was more dangerous. Underscore 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 underscore. March 76. He'd taken Gale to 2 West to learn its infrastructure. As a war hero, he'd been assigned a comfortable position in their district. Gale had the grave misfortune of meeting Magnilda first. Nero would have been the ideal, Felix figured. Dicey, a secondary, perhaps. Felix had immediately tensed at the chance encounter. He's even more rugged in person. Looks like he'll fit right into this hellhole, Magnilda said seductively to Gale after catching sight of them one afternoon walking through Market Street. Gale shifted a bit uncomfortably. It would have been entertaining if he hadn't been worried that Gale would be bleeding out within the next 60 seconds. Is she flirting with me? He asked Felix in a hushed whisper. The black-haired boy shook his head, surprised by Gale's indirectness, and still slightly on edge. No. You need to leave. Her dark eyes held a nasty mischief that reminded him entirely too much of Clove. Which would have been expected, except that Magnilda had always worn her heart on her sleeve. Her attire, which had normally been inappropriately colorful, was now one-toned, black. She was fitted from top to bottom in black jeans, a black low-cut shirt, black leather boots, even a black headband, and a dollop more of a black makeup than she could successfully pull off. It was like a gritty funeral every day. What? Why? Gale asked. Because she's dangerous. Gale looked her over. She was maybe 5'6", at the most 130 pounds. What could she honestly do that would have someone like Felix concerned? He was scary, but this girl. She was just a child. The war's over was all Gale said. He didn't want to fight anymore. Especially not a little girl, even one trying too hard to look older than she clearly was. Magnilda's lips turned upwards. I trained for the games, not a war. Those are over too. The self-satisfied expression fell from her face. Then let's play our own round. She stalked up to him. Gale remained impassive, watching her warily examine him in closer detail. Finally, Felix supplied softly, her father worked inside the base. He suffocated as a consequence of the avalanche. It made her an orphan. What right do you have to tell him that? Magnilda had stalled for a second, but at that commentary, she immediately revved back up. I'm trying to move on, H. You should too. Gale watched them curiously. How exactly do you two know each other? Take your fucking pick, 12. He was my cohort instructor, my cousin's best friend, my sister's mentor. He tried to murder my best friend once, too, so we can add that to the list. It depends on what role he's choosing to play this week. Felix balked. I was not going to kill fucking Oriane. I was 14 and a prick, but I wasn't actually going to murder an 8-year-old. What difference does it make? I was 12 and not a prick when I murdered Halston Rooney. Considering you know his fucking name, I don't think that holds much weight in your argument. Magnilda soured at that response. He let his arms fall to his side. You know I'm sorry. You know I'll be sorry for the rest of my life, so why do you keep trying to play these mind games? Here's some free advice. None of this will bring her back, Magnilda. So why the fuck are you trying to take Clove's place? She's dead. 6 feet under, and we don't need a replacement. She'd have sooner slit her throat than let you try. First of all, my name is Nellie. She shook furiously, the kitchen knife he hadn't noticed before clenched firmly in her right hand. Then, she grit out, second, it's so fucking easy to judge when you have nothing to lose. But she was wrong. He'd had everything to lose. He'd just realized it a moment too late. underscore 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 underscore. April, 76. He and Gail's friendship, or whatever it was particularly enthralling. Gail was always on edge, always to himself, but he'd begun loosening up. It took him a few weeks to ask what he'd wanted to know from the moment they'd left Magnilda in the market. Magnilda was everyone's little pet. Gail listened intently, but you don't seem to like her. Make no mistake, Gail. Everyone in 2 is a game player, even the cute ones. She doesn't seem to like you much either, but you can't have been too close. You don't even know her name. Felix groaned. Magnilda is her name. The year I started high school, I became a training assistant for Magnilda's age group. The day before the training year began, I memorized the entire cohort roster, or at least I tried to. He leaned back, placing his hands behind his head. Gail arched his brows. 104 7- and 8-year-old kids. Magnilda's name was at the top of my roster and I got antsy, so I sort of just fixated on her name for a while. I didn't know that she had a nickname. You could tell the trainers over and over again, but they didn't care, so it's not like there was any note. I don't do it to piss her off, it's just hard to see her as anything else. Gail then relayed the reasoning behind his questions. He'd seen her again with her cousin and he'd tried to apologize for what he'd done to her father. When Felix looked ready to have a stroke, Gail only remarked that he thought she'd understood, maybe even forgave him. It wrecked all of us when Cato and Clove died, but her especially so. And Dicey, but he left that comment out. I can tell. We were a family. A dysfunctional, chaotic family, but we really cared about each other when we weren't trying to strangle and rip out each other's limbs. Magnilda has a cousin, Nero. He was my best friend, till I shot him in the Battle of 2. I don't think he's going to come around anytime soon. His roommate snorted. The raven-haired man continued, the soldier that Katniss saved was another one of them. Worst person for her to encounter, actually, so I'm surprised he didn't pull the trigger. Whatever she said must have really gotten to him. Katnipp's persuasive when it matters. Gale sounded convinced, so he didn't fight him on the matter. We were all fighting for the same thing, to bring justice to Cato and Clove and to break the stasis in our lives. Unfortunately, the magic is in interpretation. His face pondered the thought briefly, that's probably the smartest thing you've said to date. Felix laughed. Underscore 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 underscore. May, 76. I came here with the intention of being pissed off. Magnilda plopped onto the grass in front of the two headstones. Emptying a cellophane bag, she pulled out a handful, laying the color-coded chocolate in the outline of a large smiley face on a patch of grass to her left. But, today's been such a nice day, and I don't know. I think it's symbolic. That there's more to life than feeling sorry for myself. The 14-year-old girl laid the brightly colored flowers in front of Clove's grave, announcing, I fought for you guys to be together, but it wasn't easy. She clasped her hands together. Dad wanted you to be with Mom. She looked to Cato's headstone, but your dad, Cato, he wanted you to be with Mars. I spent so long crying for myself and my own hurts, but watching him made me want to cry all over. Magnilda threw her hands into the air, defeated, but I felt like you guys spent all your lives together, side by side, and that it wouldn't have been right to keep you apart. So if I ruined your burial plans, sorry, but I won that one. She blocked the sun with her eyes, pointing hazily to the right. Mom's over there and then pointed to the left, and Mars is somewhere off in that direction. Magnilda dipped her hand into the bag of candy, eating a handful, and noted, Felix is home and he's not dead. You win some, you lose some, I guess. He brought home this guy from 12, and he's alright. Felix is so obviously trying to turn him into Nero, but I don't know. I think Gale's more of a straight shooter. He's more of a Kato, if you were twice as angry and half as talented. A sneaky smile crossed her face. Nero's still with Aniston, by the way. I guess it's true love after all, or whatever. I haven't really seen much of Dicey. Wish I could tell you more, because I know he was your guy's favorite, but it's been really awkward between Callan, Hallie, and I since you guys left. I can't look them in the face, not after how mean I was to them before the war. I haven't been doing too well the last couple years if you hadn't guessed yet. I'm all alone and for every up there always seems to be a down. Dad's death hit me pretty hard, though, but he's with Mom now. I hope they're happy together. Sometimes, when I'm really sad, I like to guess what you'd say to me. You'd probably tell me to stop being such a crybaby and grow some balls. Maybe it is time I stop making excuses. She wiped her tears. Taking another piece of chocolate, she laughed slightly. You'd probably throttle me for wasting your candies, Kato. Nell. Chocolate is fucking delicious, why are you using them as decoration? The goddamn ants are going to devour them all, and then give me a stern talking to about whatever nonsense would be on your mind. The brunette laid her head to the ground, leafing through her pockets. Even though you guys are gone, I know you'll always be by my side. She snorted. That sounds pretty stupid now that I think about it. I guess what I'm trying to say is that I'm living day to day and that I know you guys would want me to be doing something more with my life than just being angry all the time. She withdrew a bow from her pocket, slipping the teal clip into her hair. Magnilda looked to Kato's grave. I'd brought this for you. You were always into that sentimental bullshit, but I think I'll be keeping this one. Sue me, asshole. She stuck out her tongue, a playful grin lighting up her cheeks. Magnilda extended her arms outwards and enjoyed the sun cascading across her skin, allowing the breeze to ruffle her hair. And I guess I'm not as sad anymore, because I know we'll meet again someday. Underscore 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 underscore. Alternate ending, 1/12. Underscore 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 underscore. In her last moments, Clove prayed for death to be kind and clamped her eyes shut. With her hands covering her ears, she barely heard the garbled remark, "Watch your back." A spurt of sticky, warm blood hit her face and she screamed out instinctively. This was how she'd meet her bitter end. In a desperate motion, Clove wiped the blood away from her eyes and shook, preparing for what would come next. 40 agonized souls would soon claim sweet justice. Their judge, jury, and executioner would forever burn in hell's blazing inferno. Hesitantly, Clove forced her eyes open just in time to see 12 retreat back into the forest. It was then that she realized the blood wasn't hers. Well, of course it wasn't. She looked at her jacket sleeves and gingerly pressed her fingers against her head. Thresh laid on the grass before her, his eyes stony even in death, with a spear lodged directly in his heart. The heart is a mere organ to keep you alive. The blonde withdrew it in a harsh motion and began a barrage of hits on the corpse, lashing out and leaving several gaping holes in the boy from 11's back. Finally, he stopped and viciously spat. Let that be a warning. It took her a second to realize he was addressing the cameras and not her. Clove's confused eyes met his. Her heart would have been pounding with love, affection, admiration, but mostly she was just grateful and overwhelmed. Kato, she began, all clear in her tone. He gave her a spiteful look. Did you not listen to a word I said? Kato demanded, his voice a few octaves higher than normal. You go down, I go with you. Your arrogance almost cost us both of our lives. At a loss for what to say, Clove remained in her vulnerable position of the floor. You're overreacting. The blonde's eyes narrowed into the slits as he barked, he was going to kill you. Clove held the throwing knife firmly in her hand and defensively mumbled, I would have been fine. Kato gave her an incredulous look, crossing his arms and returning to his regular stance. If you really think that, then maybe we should part ways. What? Stupidity is dangerous, and if you really think that, then I guess I can't afford to have you on my team. Clove studied him for a moment, before gritting out. "Fine, I'll get my things and go." He didn't miss the flash of hurt across her face, but every action had a reaction. Kato knew that better than anyone. He remained at the cornucopia as she headed north for the lake. As soon as she was out of sight, he retrieved the bag marked II and then opened Fresh's bag. To his displeasure, it wasn't filled with food, and instead held rope. Kato didn't bother trying to figure out the significance, and what Fresh was supposed to have done with it, but his mind strayed to what Clove would have done with it. Meanwhile, Clove gathered her things from camp and headed into the forest in the same direction as the girl from 12 had sprinted towards. She could have laughed at the irony. The arena was an compressed area and it had already managed to replicate her and Kato's entire relationship over the last 10 years in the span of 2 weeks. She was beginning to wonder if the arena was meant to be more a psychological assessment than an evaluation of their physical capabilities. A few hours into her journey, she mellowed a bit. Okay, so maybe she'd been a bit presumptuous and irresponsible. Kato had every right to be mad. She would have been too, but to just cut her from his alliance was cruel even for him. With a resigned sigh, Clove combed through the forest, brainstorming how to find the other tributes when she thought of the perfect way to get back into Kato's good graces. Honestly, she could have created a half-dozen Venn diagrams at this point. It was simple, really. She'd kill 12 for him. He hated killing, after all. Then she'd let him do the honors of finishing Red and allow him the honor of the very last kill. She hoped this brief respite would help him overcome the haziness he'd suffered from. It didn't take a genius, though Kato was the closest person she knew to one, to see that the arena had not been good to him. Clove made a silent commitment to get him out as soon as possible. "Don't worry. It'll be over soon." As night fell, Clove rested at the base of a tree and tried to warm herself up. A few hours into her sleep, rain descended upon her and she nearly let out a displeased wail. Unlike Kato, the dark-haired girl knew she had thin blood and much less insulation against the cold. It was almost sad how easily such a small matter broke her. Clove placed her head in her knees and wrapped her arms around the base of her kneecaps. She almost pitied the tributes from the poor districts. Did they go nights without heat? Even the most decrepit homes in 2 West were warm at night, just another consequence of living in the middle of the desert. A certain sympathy overcame her, but she brushed it away. Clove reprimanded herself. You can only save one person at a time. And she would save Kato 100 times before anyone else, because he needed her most. Mentally blocking him from her thoughts, she shifted her thoughts to the various survival techniques they had been taught in strategy courses. Countless wilderness concepts flashed to front of her mind, some more useful than the others. A few that came to mind included to protect yourself from the cold by placing a barrier between you and the ground, pulling up your collar and use your breath to stay warm, keep your feet dry. The list went on and on. These were temporary fixes, though. There was no way to survive using these techniques alone. Closing her eyes and assuming the form of a ball, Clove returned to sleep. In the morning, the rain continued to fall and she quickly realized that if she wanted to remain a contender that she'd need to find sustainable shelter and fast. A hollow tree, cave, cove, dome, or dune. Something. Anything. She wandered rather aimlessly, trying to get into the minds of her competitors. District 12 was farthest east in Panem, who knew how long their tributes could survive in open air, and District 5 was situated in the breezy Midwest. She'd recalled Felix looking especially pale in the mid-districts during his victory tour. Apparently only she and Kato were at an extreme disadvantage. By now, Lover Girl was most likely nursing Bread Boy back to health, probably in more ways than one. That was fine with her. Clove had a lot of tension she needed to exhaust and the two of them would be the perfect canvases. 12's girl especially had nice cheekbones, they'd be the perfect place to start. Such a thought cheered her up considerably. A second bit of mercy appeared as she contemplated torturing Fire Girl as Bread Boy looked on, but she dismissed the idea. For a moment, she felt only a small inkling of the immense agony that would overcome her if she was forced to watch as someone hurt Kato. It had been bad enough when they'd been just friends and the 10-year-old boy had worked so hard not to cry as she'd attempted to tend to the wounds his parents had inflicted on him. Clove made a note to make sure Cato's mother suffered a most inglorious end when they returned. Losing him was an impossibility she didn't dare contemplate too long. 3 weeks and he'd already wormed his way back into her heart. Hours passed as Clove tried to find the other's tributes. Her movements halted at long last when she tripped over some slippery rocks and scuffed up her pants, leaving her not only cold, but dirty. Clove bit back a sob. This was hopeless. Something fell over Clove. She looked up weakly towards the sky and realized it wasn't a parachute. No, all the sponsors would go to Cato, because he likely wasn't being a crybaby like she was right now. She turned around to see a pair of sadly sympathetic blue eyes. You didn't really think I'd leave you on your own, did you? His voice was soothing, coalescing her like warm tea during a frosty night, even more comforting than the blanket he'd draped over her. He was literally her shelter in the rain and she couldn't stop her heart from beating out of her chest. She was broken, tired, and anguished. More humble than she'd ever been in her life, she croaked out, I don't know. I deserved it. Cato pulled a tendril of her hair back and pulled the hood of her jacket further up to cover her face. He rubbed her back comfortingly, a soft apology on the tip of his tongue. You scared me, Clove. I woke up with no idea where the hell you went and then I heard your screams and I really thought I wasn't going to make it. I really thought I'd have to watch you die, and I was more scared than I'd ever been in my life. We have so many more adventures in life and I couldn't stand the idea that could be the end. He wrapped the blanket around her shoulders and pulled her close, as if afraid to let go. Do you still hate me? She asked loudly, struggling to hear him over the pouring rain. Cato looked directly at her, staring into her eyes, and made sure she was paying attention. You really are a bad listener, he replied back equally as loudly. I could never hate you, Clove. Underscore 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 underscore. Alternate ending, part 2/12. Underscore 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 underscore. As he led her back to their camp, Clove chastised herself. She really needed to get her shit together. The cameras were always on and unless their sack contained a bounty of food, they'd need to prove themselves worthy opponents. She wanted to spit, thinking about how many sponsors the pair from 12 likely had. She wondered how the crowd back home was taking it, Magnilda, Dicey, Nero, her father. Oh, her father. He'd probably have a number of choice words for her weakness. It wouldn't fare well to forget Felix either. He was their lifeline, and although the 17-year-old mentor had come a long way from the slick 14-year-old kid who threatened to withhold her sponsors if she didn't comply with his outrageous demands, he still had certain expectations. Most of which she'd probably failed to meet long ago. It was an unfortunate end when she trusted him more than her idol, the woman she'd wanted to meet her whole life. He was probably throwing anything he could find at the screen and muttering under his breath, "Oh, so now you decided to be vulnerable. Where the fuck was that when I tried to say goodbye, you bitch?" Clove wiped her face clean on the sleeve of her jacket and looked upwards towards the sky with a smug smirk. It'd be a mistake to count her out yet. Her lapse of judgment with Thresh had been a one-time incident and one she didn't plan on repeating. She could just hear the Capitol announcers now. How fascinating, Caesar, how the games show the tribute's true colors. It appears that District 2 tribute Clove Holloway is nothing without the help of her district partner 16-year-old Cato Elroy. And the truth of the matter was that they didn't know a thing. The blonde brat would have been toast a long time ago if she hadn't stepped into his life. Not that she held it against him. She didn't. They'd fought together side by side their entire lives, she'd taught him to throw knives and he'd saved her from plummeting to her immediate death. She'd fed him for years and he'd broken Paxton Watson's arm for making fun of her. She'd tended to him when the trackjackers stung and he'd given her a blanket in the soaking rain. It was a reciprocal relationship, it always had been, but no one ever seemed to acknowledge her deeds. Hello. Why did they think Cato liked her? Despite his charm, he wasn't the most personable individual, and it certainly wasn't for her good looks or social skills. "What's our game plan?" His face seemed long, tired, and Clove pushed him down onto the sheets. "Get some rest," she told him. "We'll talk about it in the morning." The blonde didn't need to be told twice and quickly sought rest. She preferred him this way, because every time he grew concerned for her, he stopped caring about himself and fixated only on her. Which was touching, but also rather degrading. Kato didn't wake to change guard. Their last contenders were miles away, probably seeking their own shelter from the rain. Though obstructed by the tent's flimsy cover, she could still hear, feel, breathe the rainfall. She befriended Dicey in a summer's rain 5 years earlier. How was he faring watching the back and forth between her and Kato? Was he still scared, still nervous? Late the next morning, Kato wiped the sleep from his eyes and yawned. "My watch now. It's been daylight for at least 5 or 6 hours. We need to start planning. You up to it?" Clove had asked out of concern, but his glare didn't decompress. She'd just pegged him as weak, lethargic, and the Hunger Games were not the place to play sweet indulgences and butterfly kisses. Kato shook her shoulder, a slightly sullen expression across his face. "Hey. Pay attention. Your coordination has been dismal and your attention span faint." The blonde gave her a look she wasn't particularly fond of and she scowled in return. The last time he'd made such a remark had been when she was 14 and had been sick with the flu. He'd followed up with the question, "Are you pregnant?" and she'd considered burying herself alive at the time, because she hadn't even thought of the possibility, and thought of telling Kyler had made her vomit even harder. Kato had been discreet and surprisingly supportive, but it had been a scare she constantly tried to omit from her memory. Clove looked at him defensively and scowled when she realized that was what he was alluding to. "No, Kato. No." The look of relief that crossed his face perplexed her. Even if she had been pregnant, he wouldn't have factored into the equation, so why did he care? Besides, it had been a while. A long while. "Then pull yourself together," he chastised, softly. Clove glared, absolutely fed up with his tantrums. Throughout their stay in the arena, she'd been the strong one, while he'd gone off the deep end nearly a half-dozen times. She'd been the one dealing with the repercussions of his choices. Clove scoffed. "Fine, then let's hear it." He assessed her briefly, unsure if she was angry or just acting the part. That was the thing with Clove, he never knew what she'd do next. Kato shuffled, snatching their bag and opening it wide. "They sent us armor. It's good stuff, and should protect us against most weapons. Bread boy's knife, fire girl's arrows, and whatever 5 might have picked up in the forest. We go for 5 first, get her out of the way, and then—" "No. No," he demanded, irritated. "You heard me," she snapped. "You had the last kill. I get the next one. We're going after Fire Girl first. I had the last kill because I was saving your life." Her glare intensified, the knife in her hand shaking unsteadily as she worked to repress the urge to turn him into her latest project. "Salt the wound, why don't you? Someone has a selective memory." Kato growled, 5 first and then we can make the star-crossed lovers the memorable conclusion." Clove humphed in retaliation and both turned away from one another, arms crossed, with matching stubborn expressions. Rain continued to pour down, lightning flashed, followed with a clap of thunder. "We need to get out of here." Kato rolled his eyes, welcome to 5 days ago. Though he couldn't see it, her expression tightened even more. "Fuck you. Sorry I'm not a genius like you, Blondie." "I might be the genius, but you're still the smart one," he replied. It was not a compliment. Clove nearly spat at him for his arrogance. If he thought he was such a genius, maybe he was better off alone. Romance was a novelty that she found was wearing quickly. "Do you remember the blood oath?" Kato asked her suddenly. Clove's eyes narrowed in confusion, before picking up on the reference. Why now of all times was he referencing the memory? "I remember Fix punching me in the face, crying a lot, Nero, books, and you being a coward," he supplied helpfully. "Your words. Not mine," Clove muttered. "We'd eat all the chocolate we wanted, never go without a good book, and make sandcastles on Mondays. What? That was my oath to you, Cato clarified, the briefest of smiles on his face. He kissed her hair gently, before giving her more adequate space. It'd have been a cute memory if she hadn't buried it under a dozen others, Felix pinning her against the wall, strangling her in his anger. Nero and her having a screaming fight one holiday because he'd gotten her father a better gift than she had. Cato breaking her wrist. Cato breaking up with her. Cato preventing her from getting him aid from his parents. Dicey crying after his first kill. Dicey crying after his 124th and 125th kill. Crying and anger and confusion and pain. Always pain. Life had worn her out so quickly. We were stupid kids, she finally replied. Nah. We were brilliant kids. We're stupid teenagers. Fighting isn't going to fix anything. We need to be in sync, cohesive, and thorough. There it was. His boyish smile. The one that always melted her heart. She hadn't forgotten her promise either. She'd get him out before he lost it, and boy was the blonde a ticking fucking time bomb. Clove won her end of the bargain, with it decided that she'd kill both of 12's tributes, and then they'd make a game of who earned the right to red, hopefully satisfying the Capitol's theatrical needs. Clove's face lit up. Don't worry. When I win our bet, the Capitol will hear 5 screams in their dizziest daydreams and worst nightmares. Cato had to resist kissing her. Did she know how utterly enchanting she was? Any more affection and they'd be signing their own death warrants. Even if he wasn't particularly fond of killing, he couldn't deny the joy that it brought to Clove. She looked sexiest when accepting a challenge. Don't disappoint me. Clove cocked an eyebrow at the formality. Do I ever? He laughed at her. That sexy little smirk of yours is fucking hot, Clove. She beamed slightly, not allowing the audience to see how much the remark meant to her. I'm out of your league, hotshot. Entirely. Cato agreed. He didn't know if it was the adrenaline, the relief of knowing Clove was safe, or the fact that they weren't quite out of the clear yet, but he wanted to take her right there. Throw caution to the wind and consummate everything, 1,000 kisses and breathy moans. He was ready. He wondered if one day she would be too. They had a lot to talk about first, but not here, and not now. Working to suppress his hormones, he subconsciously cleaned his sword, and counted their remaining supplies. Clove redid her hair, combing it out of her face. A parachute fell and they pulled the soaked material into the tent, untwisting the capsule. It was certain relief that Athena and Felix approved of their plans. Their capsule contained steamed rice, some configuration of ground beef, and seasoned sauce. The duo chatted animatedly and scarfed the food down in only minutes. Neither cared that they probably looked like starving slobs. Maybe because at the moment, they were starving slobs. Would it be so bad if they were human? If they were more than just killers? They'd been sold as a pair of villains, but the Capitol, try as they might, couldn't beat the last bits of humanity out of them. Not yet. Cato and Clove remained in the tent, waiting for the storm to pass. Finally, in the wake of night, it came to an abrupt end, and a cannon shot into the air. In her sleep, Clove's head shot into the air, but then she heard Cato's voice. It hadn't been him. 3 guesses, he muttered. There's only 3 contestants left, Clove replied, slightly out of it. Cato ran a hand through his hair. Well, then I guess we're all winners. In the distance, the pair heard a howl. They'd failed. It was a clear message from the Capitol, their respite was over and now it was time to pay the piper. That armor you were talking about? Clove mumbled. Nervously, Cato pulled out the armor. With such dire circumstances, neither hid under any pretense of modesty. They were undressed and redressed in an instant, fumbling clumsily with their clothes. Both looked at one another. We have to get out of here. They're drawing us together. Fucking fantastic, but when I win, I plan to continue using my legs, my arms, pretty much everything. You want to be the after-hours special, fine with me, but I'm out of here, Clove grit out darkly. Cato nodded hastily, packing up the last of their things, and jumping up as the animals' howls grew louder. Peter, hurry. Their eyes met again, with the thrill of the hunt taking only slight precedence over their fear. Both quickly left the confines of the tent, when the girl from 12 called out once more to her partner. "The cornucopia," Clove finally said. The howls grew even louder and the pair from 2 made a beeline for the golden figure. Having their camp at the lake had proven beneficial as they managed to climb atop it only a handful of seconds before their last competitors began to attempt the same thing. Sweat was gliding down the girl from 12's face, vulnerability in every fiber of her being. The girl looked at Clove, a silent plea in her motions as she tried to scale the cornucopia. Clove finally gave in, pulling the girl atop it, and she wondered if the girl from 12 realized she'd just made a grave mistake. A malicious smirk brightened Clove's features instantly. "If you thought that was an act of mercy, then maybe you were better off with the wolves, 12. Time to play." Clove quickly pinned the girl from 12 down, her back arched uncomfortably over her quiver of arrows. The girl from 12 stretched out her fingers in an attempt to reach for her bow in a last-ditch effort to save herself. Clove laughed cruelly as she snatched the weapon and threw it to the wolves. Clove's eyes flashed coolly towards Cato, commanding, "Grab Loverboy. He's next." A sickeningly amused expression appeared on the blonde's face as he wrestled the boy from 12. "You escaped me once, Loverboy. It won't happen twice." The boy struggled in Cato's grip and Clove shot her partner a threatening glare. "I swear to God if he suffocates before I get my turn at him, Cato, you'll be taking his place." Cato's grip instantly slackened. Clove turned back to the girl from 12. "At least you can take solace in the fact that your death will provide entertainment for almost 4 million people around the country. It's all you deserve and more for robbing your sister of the chance for honor. She'll never have such an opportunity ever again, and you know, during our intermission, I thought to myself, Fire Girl actually has really nice cheekbones, Clove. It'd be a crime not to share their beauty with the people of Panem." 12 winced at Clove's haunting smile. "So, I think we'll start there." Her first incision was precise, clean, and barely a flesh wound. Clove spread the blood with the flat edge of her knife, but glowered as her steady supply of paint dwindled. In a swift motion, she cut even deeper and the girl from 12 screamed. "Katniss!" Loverboy screamed in response. Delighted, Clove smeared the blood on 12's right cheek and then onto the left. Her flesh had sliced so easily, pleasing Clove magnificently. Cato had always used death as a cover, a mask for his pain, but for the 16-year girl from District 2, to kill had always been an expression of joy, excitement, and artistry. She didn't dare taint such purity with her grief. Clove continued to the edge of 12's mouth. "Your big mouth almost cost me my life," Clove said fondly. Her expression hardened. "Almost took the breath from my lungs." Beginning at her victim's forehead, Clove made 15 horizontal incisions down 12's face. The girl from 2 could feel Fire Girl's erratic heartbeat. "There's almost one for every day we've been in the arena. Look at you, Fire Girl. You've finally earned your stripes." Blood from one incision flowed vertically down 12's face and into the other wounds. 12's eyes fluttered, blood on her lashes as Clove made one last incision directly below 12's chin, cutting her throat. "See you in hell, Fire Girl," Clove sneered. The cannon boomed instantly. Cato was struggling with their former ally, the boy from 12, who not only wouldn't stop crying, but had also vomited during Clove's performance. Growing frustrated, Cato released him, and then proceeded to punch him in the face. He fell onto the metal and Cato spat, "You made a big fucking mistake helping her." The blonde pinned down the boy from 12, and he screamed out in agony as Cato pulled his right arm from its socket. Clove crossed her arms, a thin expression of approval on her face. It was about time Cato played the game. "He's all yours," Cato offered politely. "Don't worry. I'll be sure to reward you handsomely," Clove told him with a flirtatious smile. Cato's smirk fell into a lopsided grin. She was really something else. In a single motion, Clove cut Loverboy's shirt open as he thrashed under her grasp. He moaned, the pain in his right arm unbearable. Impatient, Clove kneed him in the stomach. The blood from his nose smeared across the crux of her elbow as she pinned him down. With a gentle glide of her fingers across his chest, she decided on her first mark. She began carving the shape of a romantic heart over the skin that covered his very own heart. He let out a blood-curdling scream as the blood oozed down his chest. "It's almost hysterical, bread boy. You always were the bleeding heart and now you can prove it." Clove continued lower, making more and more incisions as Cato slowly realized what she was trying to do. In almost an Eddie Fox sort of move, she'd begun to outline his organs, as if creating an anatomical map. She'd drawn the kidneys, his spleen, and even his intestines before Cato got a little green. How long was she going to draw this out? It didn't help that every glide of her fingers across 12's chest left him incredibly uneasy. Finally, Cato could take no more of her parlor tricks and thrust his sword directly through 12's heart. "Consider it an act of mercy," was his only reply to the terrified glint in 12's eyes as his sword descended upon him. "Cato!" Clove snapped, robbed of her rightfully earned prize. "Were you going to fry him or fuck him?" Cato demanded in return. She studied him for a moment. He wasn't jealous. He was scared. Oh fuck. She'd probably been just like her. Clove sighed, and hesitantly raised her right hand to brush the hair out of his face. His nerves soothed a bit at the gentle touch, reminding him she was still in there, right as the second cannon fired into the air. "We did it," he said faintly, wiping the sweat from his forehead. She gave him a small smile. "Did you ever have a doubt in your mind?" Feigning arrogance, he arched his eyebrows, "Not even for a second." The two waited for Claudius Templar Smith to announce their victory, but weren't gifted with such a reward. Instead, several minutes later, his voice boomed over the loudspeaker. "Greetings to the final contestants of the 74th Hunger Games. The earlier revision has been revoked. Closer examination of the rule book has disclosed that only one winner may be allowed." Cato and Clove broke apart, stunned. "Good luck and may the odds be ever in your favor." Neither budged an inch. Cato thought back his two brothers' journal, about how he'd once watched a capital movie in which a pair of twins had been allowed to win together. Mars had penned, "They'd never let two people win the Hunger Games, and why should they? To share a victory is the lowest form of cowardice, laziness. To come so far and then fall so low. You can't do that." Clove yelled at the sky in disbelief. She'd always fought the inevitable, refused to give up, but right as she was about to offer the capital a piece of her mind, the blonde boy threw himself on top of her, a snarl on his face as the world fell into chaos once more. Underscore 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 underscore. Alternate ending, 3/12. Underscore 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 underscore. Callan Wilder and Magnilda Holloway shared the same dark hair and chocolate brown eyes. Even the same splatter of freckles around their cheeks. It gave them an aura of innocence the two didn't actually possess. In fact, if Dicey didn't know any better, the two of them would seem like siblings rather than Callan and Hallie. You know, if they hadn't just kissed another with such fervor it'd made his stomach sour. Romance was not exactly his crux. Both Cato and Clove could attest to the dozen girls he'd lazily strung along in the last 5 years and the very bad end he'd had with the last one. Dicey was sitting to his sister's left and trying with all his might not to think of what had happened if Callan knocked up Clove's sister. Then again, Callan was smarter than him and Magnilda less worldly at 12 than Clove. Clove had made sure of that. Those incisions on 12's face were fucking clean. You think Clove would teach me how to do that? Nero snorted. Stick to spears, skin and bones. Dicey pouted and continued to wait for the announcement. You should have gone for the quell, Nero. Then I could tell everyone that all of my friends are victors. Magnilda gave him a teasing smile. Does that count include Felix? I guess so. Hallie laughed. He cocked up an eyebrow. Let's have a prayer circle that Cato and Clove move in right next to him. It'd be the best opportunity for pranks. The homes have security codes, Dice Nero corrected lazily, looking much less strained than he'd been for the last few weeks. The auburn-haired teen whined, leaning back. After several minutes of waiting with matching bored expressions, Hallie finally piped up, "It's taking them forever for the hovercrafts to take their bodies from the arena." "Yeah," Callan quipped grumpily, "and they haven't removed the wolves yet, either." "We get it. They're fucking scary. Congratulations." Magnilda was frowning in agreement. Nero stared at the TV with unease. A storm was on the horizon. A mic boomed and the group watched the screen with relief. Finally. Greetings to the final contestants of the 74th Hunger Games. The earlier revision has been revoked. Closer examination of the rule book has disclosed that only one winner may be allowed. Good luck and may the odds be ever in your favor. The group watched as Cato and Clove separated. Reactions varied across the board. "What rule book?" Nero yelled at the television. Quietly, Dicey mumbled, "Make me an Avox for all I care. I can't be a part of this." He then trailed out of the room, trying not to let his friends and family see the tears ready to fall. Nero pulled Magnilda over to him, whispering in gentle hushs, "It'll be over soon." He covered her eyes with his hands and held her shaking form. If Clove. The blue-eyed teen tried not to think about it, tried not to think about how much of a better cousin he should have been when he'd had the chance. "You can't do that!" Clove screamed on the screen. With her eyes cast upwards towards the game makers, Nero watched as she failed to notice Cato stalking towards her. He grabbed harshly. Clove grimaced under Cato's hold and looked into his crazed eyes. Maybe it wasn't worth it, winning with him, if he was going to be under the steroids' effects for rest of his life. Patience simply wasn't a virtue she'd been bestowed with. Cato threw the first hit, hitting her cheekbone with impressive damage. Clove fell to the ground, clutching her cheek, and waiting impassively for what came next. His eyes narrowed. "What the fuck do you think you're doing? Isn't that much obvious?" she pant out. "I'm fucking done playing. Fight back." The dark-haired girl turned from him in protest. "Fight back," he repeated, shifting the weight of his knee onto her. She didn't cry out, but the discomfort was apparent enough. Clove took a heavy breath, shut her eyes, and swiftly elbowed him. He released her and she withdrew in an instant. Finally. He growled and pulled the sword from his jacket with a nasty glint. "You're out of options, cuties." Cato sneered with a sick laugh and she wondered if he was about to cry. "Now, you're going to fight fair and we'll see who deserves to live." The dark-haired girl didn't know whether to be disappointed or proud of Cato's behavior. He was terrified, that much she could attest to, but the audience probably didn't have a clue. She nearly barked a laugh in reply to his challenge. Neither of them deserved to live, but either way, the final choice came down to her, not him. "You're playing by my rules now, Cato." Clove's tone was void of cruelty, only observance of simple fact. "So, let's see what you're capable of." "I will not fight like a coward." Cato barked at her. There it was. The glimmer of fear. Too late for that. That side tackle was really dignified. "I'll remember that cheap shot till my remains disintegrate." The sword in his hand gleamed magnificently. It was beautiful, one of the Capitol's best works, really. He snatched her by the ends of her ponytail and dragged her to him with a malicious jeer, "You will fight or?" Clove scowled and swat his hand away, with a dirty look. "Don't touch my hair. Easy shots don't suit you." Felix had told her time and time again that it was a weakness, but small sacrifices were worth allowing her mother's memory to live on. Magnilda's hair had never gone much past her shoulders, but Clove's hair had always been her small vanity. "Stop being a coward and give the audience what they want, Clove." She didn't know why she was willing to do this for him. He was a sniveling coward easily swayed by public opinion. Clove redirected his sword towards her throat, one of the only patches of skin uncovered by the armor, and easily commanded, "Go on, then." Cato didn't move his sword from the edge of her throat. "That's what you'd like. For me to win dishonorably, to rob me of my last victory." She shook her head, exasperated. "We've spent our entire lives destroying one another, which would be fine if it were on our own terms. As it stands, it's not, and this needs to stop. You break my wrist and I give your battle wounds with jagged rocks." You threaten me in a haziness and I come after you in your darkest hour. I'm done with this. I won't do it anymore. Do what? Hurt you. And then the television screen flashed black. Underscore 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 underscore. I didn't think you thought so lowly of me, he scoffed. I don't honestly care. Clove. I won't resist. She was serious, and suddenly every sin he'd ever committed against her amassed in his chest. Fight back, he commanded. Clove looked to the floor. It's your turn. I've had my happiness. My parents were fair, Magnilda is safe. I've never had to go to bed hungry, be plagued by terrors in the night, or willfully deprived of sleep. Stop it. Cato demanded. His resolve had long shaken, and though she didn't dare look him in the eye, she knew he was barely holding himself together. Making me look weak won't make you any stronger. Promise not to forget me, Cato. Stop. This has to happen. You will fight back, he howled, drawing in on her. I'm glad we were friends. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she quickly pulled at the blade of his sword, ready to impale herself on the weapon. Think of me happily when you get back to 2. Don't be torn up by this. This is my last gift, a token of what you mean to me. This, I give freely and without hesitation. But, what are you willing to do to win, Cato? Are you willing to sacrifice your pride, heart, even your dignity for the sake of dead man? Cato swayed his sword in the opposite direction at the last second and cut his hand as it rebounded. I understand now, Mars, he thought to himself, tears wetting his cheeks. The other tributes, Fresh, Everdeen, Loverboy, they weren't his enemies. After a decade of cheering for the best their district could offer, he recognized too late that these games were no match for glory. They were pure degradation of the human condition. Even when he did return, the capital wouldn't care about him. He dropped the sword onto the edge of the cornucopia and knelt down beside Clove, only murmuring, I know you've read enough books to know that heroes don't just give up, Clovey. She only gave him a fragmented laugh. Was this the time for literary analogies? Really? Cato, I think we're the villains. We could be more, he said, and then implored her. Let's be more, Clove. Her eyes looked back to his, recalling her end-all goal. Any semblance of sweetness vanished as she sneered, enough. I need to cleanse of my sins. How I've only mocked my district's efforts, wasted their resources. End this. Cato pulled her into his shaking arms, cradling her protectively. It was hard to be brave when his light had so quickly burnt out. He needed her, but Cato Elroy wasn't about to die, either. He'd made a promise and this time he'd keep it. It was hard to think of what to do. Clove had said he was genius, but he seemed to hit roadblocks at every new development. Think. The capital wouldn't let them win, but what if they escaped? Unearthed the ground until they found refuge. They could do it. Together, he and Clove could do anything. Gently, but with great determination, he remarked. I love you. Trust me. Love was stupid. Love was for children, puppies, and small things. Love wasn't enough. And just as she was about to tell him as much, he dragged her towards the cornucopia's edge. The predatory wolves remained. On my count we jump. 1. Not standing up to Felix when it counted. 2. Being too stubborn to ask for Dice's forgiveness. 3. Pushing Clove away when he needed her most. It'd be different this time. He'd be brave. No. Cato, that's a bad idea. Clove landed roughly on her feet, looking around for only a moment. There was nowhere to go. Oh, love, you are so stupid. He was going to get the both of them killed, and then her sacrifice would be in vain. It was unbearably warm for such a temperate climate. Sure, she could climb trees, but where do you hide when you're 6'2" and 185 pounds? Being small had its advantages, and right now they needed all the advantages they could get. His eyes lit up and before she knew it, they'd been immersed halfway in a cool body of water. Love was stupid. Kato was stupid. We can't swim, you idiot. Well, that wouldn't have been a problem if you hadn't. The water swirled ominously around them and Kato looked at Clove uncomfortably. Hold tight. Quickly, the sky darkened and the waves began to swirl out of control in a counterclockwise motion, drawing them in. In only seconds, Kato lost his iron grip on Clove's hand. His body began to drift violently towards the center of the developing whirlpool. He extended his arm towards her, the fear in his eyes terrifying her as he drifted farther and farther away from her. Kato, she screeched, trying to swim towards him. Clove, he called out in return. She could almost breath his desperation. Clove tried to glue her feet to the ground, but the current of the water refused to oblige her. Kato, she screamed as the whirlpool drew her in. The blonde was violently submerged underwater, before emerging again. Though it was difficult for him to look directly at her with the water splashing about, the boy worked to train his eyes on hers. I'm sorry. I thought. His thought was broken as he was pushed under, re-emerging a second time out of breath. Kato's thoughts shifted as he screamed out as he was pulled farther and farther from the girl. Don't give up, Clove. Don't give up. Don't give up. Everything became hazy, and then the two fell into a chasm with no end. Underscore 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 underscore. These idiots don't know how to swim. 2 West ain't exactly District 4. What the fuck are they teaching you kids out in the boonies? Everything they can with everything they have. Well, at least my tribute is self-aware. These two are an absolute disgrace. These two are the best this district has had in years. Went a fucking decade between Armoy's victory and mine. If you know anyone better, you should have sent them here, so then I wouldn't have to watch as one of my friends die. So which of them is better? 73. How the hell should I know? I wasn't in the regular practice of drowning my friends. I'm not a goddamn medium. No, because if you were, you would have known better. Encouraging them to play the romance angle. Since when do we take heed from a slummy outline and their starving street rats? Underscore 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 underscore. She was sinking, falling further and further into a black hole, a void. Will you be there when I get home, Mama? Her hands swiftly covered her heart. The stars were magnificent, just a touch out of reach, and she had all the time in the world to work her way there. Underscore 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 underscore. Decades, hours, weeks, months passed in the span of seconds. Darkness was a lonely companion. Where am I? The chasm defied mathematics, common sense, empirical virtue. The universe was infinite, but here he was safe. And then daylight bloomed. Underscore 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 underscore. Felix forced himself into the seat, the bags under his eyes sunken in. Well, it's day 7. Let's get this shit underway, I guess. This whole day-to-day update is a waste of time, but if you found out that I was keeping anything from you, you'd tear out my esophagus and probably eat it for breakfast. The dark-haired teen watched the small girl with an ache in his chest. It's always been me, you, and hospitals, H. You think I'd be used to it by now? I've seen you in hospital beds so many times. Hell, I used to have a fucked up habit of putting you in them too. He moved the hair out of Clove's eyes and sighed. Not that you're immune to unhealthy life choices either. You have this bad habit of getting yourself hurt, and you like to play it off tough, but I know something thrills you about being the hero. Heroes are dumb, H. I've never known a good person who's lived, except maybe Nero, and he's barely good. Like the faint outline of what someone good might act like if they had the luxury. Resting his palms on his knee, he resisted the urge to swallow the glass of water on her night table whole. No one know what's going on. They cut the feed after you refused to fight, and I'm pretty sure everyone's gone mad from the lack of information. I would have. It's the first time I've been glad that I'm here and not home. With a throaty cough, he leaned his head against Clove's stomach as he had years ago. I wish I could have done more. I should have, because now here you are. Dead, but undead. Not quite there, but getting closer and closer. He rubbed the back of her hand and held tight, before letting go, reluctantly. I don't know how much longer I can do this, anymore. Sorry, little H. Felix stood up and headed for the door when he saw a slight flutter of lashes. He blinked, and mumbled, I'm seeing things. Then a hacking cough emerged from her throat and he ran right back to her, ready to call for the nearest capital nurse. Breath, Clove. Breathe. He didn't know why he was saying this when he knew she couldn't hear a word he said. So you do, she coughed. No, my another cough, my name. Her hazel eyes fluttered open. Her face an unhealthy red from the hacking coughs. A wide smile spread on his face, a rather jarring experience for the girl who so rarely saw Felix smile. He covered his mouth with his fist, breathing, if anyone could do this. He laughed to the point of tears. If anyone could do this, it'd be you. What day is it? She whispered hoarsely. The 29th of June or 30th, something like that. I haven't exactly been keeping track. He scratched the back of his head. She bit her lip, choking up. When did they bury him? Felix looked at gently, letting out air. Say you're flying in a hovercraft between west and east, and it comes crashing down into ungodly flames. Where do you bury the survivors? Clove indulged him for maybe the second or third time in her life, and unhelpfully supplied, to south. Felix snorted, frowning, what kind of sick fuck are you? What? You don't bury the survivors, H, he said, shaking his head sarcastically, and moving out of the way. An unholy squeal came from her mouth, as she started sobbing. Resting peacefully against the wall was a sleeping Cato Elroy, with all limbs intact, including his fully functional lungs. The raven-haired teen pat her hair tenderly. You guys did good. Blinking tears out of her eyes. Oh God. Oh. Cato, wake the fuck up. Felix kicked Cato's sitting figure slightly. I'm going to eat, and you need to keep H company. When did you get here? Holloway and I had our daily update. Cato yawned. You're weird. That's supposed to be something new. 6 years and counting, actually, Clove piped up, a smile in her voice. Although, with how much Fix talks, it's more like 6 years every update. Felix gave her an annoyed expression. I can't believe I wanted you to wake up. You were more fun comatose. Clove looked at him, and instead of scowling as he expected, she just started to laugh, and soon Felix joined in. The air cleared. Breaking out of his stupor, Cato pushed Felix away, and took the seat beside Clove's bed. I should have known, he said, wiping his tears away. Known what? She asked. He grinned at the memory of a 6-year-old Clove standing with her hands on her hips, and demanding. Don't count me out yet. He'd never make that mistake again. Underscore 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 underscore. They'd been crowned and sent home on a train towards 2. Felix chatted animatedly with Mali, beaming. Athena only watched from the window impatiently. If these kids thought this was the end of their endeavors. Side by side with a blanket covering them, the girl leaned onto the blonde's shoulder and he chastely kissed her forehead. Calling them stupid didn't seem fit anymore. How many times could you use the word without it losing meaning? Whatever. It wasn't her problem anymore. At least, that's what the 36-year-old woman tried to tell herself when she looked towards the dark-haired girl. The train came to a stop and they ushered the children off the platform, when a madman pushed through the audience, using choice words to hush the descent. Cato only softly remarked, Dad. Orion came forward and took his son into his arms, petting his hair, and working not to cry. "Thank God. My son. Thank God. Since when did his father believe in God? Since when did he believe in anything at all? If he had any dignity left, he'd have pushed the man away, but... Welcome home, Cato. Welcome home." Clove stood with unease, ready to pounce at any given moment, when Cato shook his head and held on to the man with all his might. "We're leaving for Golden Valley now," Athena announced, looking bored in contrast to Felix's blaring discomfort. His father smiled. "Go. I'll check in on you soon." Cato's eyes narrowed with confusion. "You're not coming. It's yours, boy. If you need my company, I'm only an auto commute away." He nodded faintly, trying to hide the disappointment, before being pulled away by Felix and shoved into the black limousine. As they left the mountains of Two North, Clove made a silent promise to return. Hike them and look down upon the lines of her district. She'd have all the time in the world, and she wouldn't settle until she explored every inch. Soon they traveled southbound along the dividing lines of west and east. It seemed impossible that only 2 months ago she'd been there to watch Cato vie for a tribute spot. As the gate to Victor's village opened, Cato observed the homes with awe. They were more impressive than he could have ever imagined, and as he leaned back with a slight grin, what he saw only left a pit in his stomach. A dirty blonde woman in her 20s in nothing but a white sleeping gown covered in nasty bruises, gashes, and a hollow look in her eyes as she checked her mail. Though she was not a Victor, she was recognizable in even such a state. He'd seen her before on television, the wife of Wyatt Armour. A feeling of dread descended upon him. Even Victor's village was not immune. For all the things it was a safe haven, apparently, it was not. Underscore 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 alternate ending 4/12 underscore 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 underscore. As their vehicle came to a stop near the end of the road, the driver looked out to his left and pointed to the third house from the end of the road. "This is the residence of the male Victor." A moment later, the driver pointed to the left once again, this time at the second house from the end of street. "The female Victor's home is adjacent to yours," he addressed Cato. Cato and Clove leaned forward. They were neighbors, just like they'd always wanted. When they came back down from their new state of elation, Cato realized Clove's eyes were affixed to Felix. "What's wrong with him?" Clove whispered. Cato didn't immediately answer, unsure if the question was directed towards him. He looked to his friend, who was leaning against the right passenger window in a heavy sleep. Athena's lips pursed together in spiteful amusement. "Didn't sleep the whole spread, but fortunately you can walk him home, considering he lives right over there." She pointed toward the opposite end of the road. Her hair swung with her in casual amusement. "Really, just across the street?" Clove lamented with a groan. "And who's across the street from me?" Cato asked, staring at the steel fortress aside Felix's Santa Fe-style abode. The redhead's smirk only widened as she delighted in telling them, "Best not to test that one, hence he play jump rope with your intestines." Clove's expression quickly transformed to one of utter glee as she poked Cato's left bicep. "Remind me not to cross that side of the road," he shuddered. The driver exited his door and pulled open left side back door. As Cato, Clove, and Athena exited, he called to the slumbering teen, "Master Gray, you've returned to Golden Valley." Felix's eyes fluttered open, squinting slowly. Hesitantly, he stepped out of the vehicle and stretched his arms. "Thank you," he said, nodding his head politely. He handed the gentleman some money and trailed behind. Athena flounced towards Cato's new home. Cato took in the scene with a sense of awe. The two-story structure had a short path of stairs beyond the gates that lead toward the front door. It was painted a crisp white, with stone accents laid evenly throughout the exterior. Unlike residences back in Two West, it was well maintained, felt new despite being several decades old. It eased him, clean and refined, welcoming and bright. He took an instant liking to it. He reluctantly stepped forward to open the door. Athena stood to his left, behind him, while Clove was beside him. "It's just a house, guys," Felix said, shoving them toward the door. Cato could hear him roll his eyes. Magnilda was the first to approach them when the door opened, barreling into their reach and wrapping her arms around Clove. "I told them you could do it, Clove. Knew you wouldn't let us down," she said, her head buried into Clove's shoulder. Clove only held her sister gingerly in return. Magnilda cheekily added, "But did you guys really have to kill Datum? He was actually really cute, though. Aren't you?" the Clove started to say, when the group heard a sarcastic cough. This was quickly followed by Cato being assaulted by a small, round object. "Or, what the hell?" he questioned in surprise, nursing the red spot on his chest where the ball made impact. "Can't catch a baseball anymore. That's a bummer. Good to know you learned absolutely nothing useful in your year of candidacy training." "Really, Dice?" Cato replied, shaking his head in good humor. The redhead appeared from the crowd. Cato tried to quell the unease he felt at his friend's poor condition, but Dicey seemed to be taking it all in stride. He grabbed Cato's neck and scuffed up his hair. "Welcome back. You mean to tell me you left?" Yeah, I did. Went to this thing called the Hunger Games. Maybe you've heard of it." Dicey's eyes shifted to the left and he threw his head back. "Can't say I know what you're talking about, and really what use do I have for a guy who can't even catch?" Clove took this as an opportunity to chime in. "Gigantic ass motherfucker can't climb trees either. Add that to the list." "Oh, you're back too, Clove?" Dicey asked, wryly. "As you live and breathe, Red. Fortunately for me, I still had my weekly Clove-induced ulcer in spite of your absence. Magnificent you were in high definition." Clove snorted, shoving him in retaliation. She leaned into him, beaming, and he grinned back, wrapping his arms around her shoulders. "Welcome home, Clo." Once their exchange was over, Athena and Felix made their way into the crowd. "Welcome back to you too, Lix," Dicey called. Felix gave him a half-hearted wave in response. A familiar middle-aged man with dark hair and green eyes came forward. It was rather unbalancing to Cato to consider how much both Clove and Nero looked like the man in completely different ways. Oh boy, those genes were strong. Lieutenant Holloway's shading matched Clove. His facial appearance was all Nero, though he'd never seen Nero with that level of contempt. Cato hoped he never did. It was a bit unnerving. "So I might have been imagining things," Magnilda said, breaking his concentration, "but I thought I heard, possibly heard, could have sworn I heard you say during the games that you were sorry for breaking up with Clove, which sounds like it means at some point you were with Clove and I just have to." As Cato opened his mouth to reply, he was quite quickly interrupted. Nero, the middle-aged man, called to attention. "Yes, sir. Since I'm apparently too fucking old to keep up with the times, Books is Clove's boyfriend?" Lieutenant Holloway asked, gesturing to Cato. He looked to Dicey. "I thought he was Clove's boyfriend. Dicey is more of their plaything." Cato, on the other hand. "How'd it go?" Nero questioned, smirking as he imitated the duo. "Cato makes Clove's heart skip a beat when she sees him read or giving Nelly pointers on how best to fight." The blue-eyed teen looked to Dicey for clarity. "Is that right?" "Close enough," the auburn-haired teen responded, snorting. Lieutenant Holloway gave Clove a pointed look. "Is that slang for he's adequate in bed, Clove? Because really, makes your heart skip a beat. Any more one-liners like that and hopefully for the sake of your dignity it'll stop beating altogether." Cato and Dicey had visceral reactions, immediately surprised by the man's cadence. In contrast, Clove didn't seem at all surprised. "I said that one time, and in confidence, you traitors," Clove protested, "and didn't you two took my side on that one, anyway?" Nero ruffled her hair, teasing, as he leaned his elbow on her shoulder. "Do I look dumb enough to ever take sides?" Wasn't that the truth, Cato thought. "What's with the looks?" the lieutenant inquired, his right eyebrow cocked. Dicey smiled a crooked smile. "It's real bizarre to hear Clove's voice coming out of Nero's face. Witnessing you is something truly uncanny." As articulate as that statement was, Scarecrow, it's probably better for you to withhold any further commentary until you've developed an elementary grasp on the English language. Case in point, Dicey retorted, unabashed. And man, I have so many questions. But not right now, Sir Cato said, dragging Dicey away from his untimely death. He abandoned the rest of the partygoers as they entered the kitchen. Caught off guard by the extravagance of the kitchen, words failed him. It was ordained with stainless steel appliances, a marble kitchen island, with a teal and grey schemed backsplash. Probably would have been better off as Cloves House, considering I never got the chance to learn how to cook, Cato observed. How'd you two pull this off? Dicey said, cutting him off from an impending tangent. How the fuck did this happen? How? I don't even know what to ask. Just, how? It was all Clove, Cato said, scratching his neck. She saved my life, saved us both, and I have no idea how to tackle whatever comes next. Dice, this has never happened before, two victors. How am I going to navigate something like this without a reference point, without any context?